Before we start, make sure you're warm, safe, and settled. No need to stay awake. This is your permission to doze off. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. The sun's barely peeking over the horizon when your alarm clock, a relic of the Soviet era, just like most things in your apartment, rattles you awake. It's April 26, 1986, a Saturday. You'd think that having a job at a nuclear power plant would come with a bit of glamour, maybe even a hint of James Bond-esque intrigue. But this isn't some Cold War spy flick. This is the real deal, and you're about to clock in at Chernobyl, a name that, unbeknownst to you, is about to become infamous. As you drag yourself out of bed, the drabness of Pripyat greets you with all the enthusiasm of a grey Soviet morning. The town, built to house the Chernobyl plant workers and their families, is a quintessential planned community efficient, if not exactly bursting with charm. It's home to about 49,000 people, all blissfully unaware of the drama about to unfold. Your job today is at reactor number 4, one of the 4 reactors at the plant. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant, officially known as the VI. Lenin Nuclear Power Station, because, of course, Lenin gets his name on everything, is the crown jewel of Soviet nuclear engineering, or so they say. You see, the RBMK reactor design used here is like a ticking time bomb. It's the Soviet Union's own, Frankenstein's monster powerful but deeply flawed. The RBMK reactor is a bit of a nightmare when it comes to safety. It's like someone decided to build a car with no seatbelts and then take it for a spin on an icy road. The reactor is notorious for its lack of a containment structure, a kind of nuclear safety net that's standard in Western plants. But in the Soviet Union, cost-cutting often trumps safety. Who needs a containment dome when you've got quotas to meet and a 5-year plan to fulfill, right? You arrive at the plant, a sprawling complex that sprawls over 2,600 hectares. It's a behemoth of concrete and steel, a testament to Soviet ambition and, perhaps, hubris. You shuffle through the entrance, flashing your ID to the guard who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. The plant hums with the energy of a typical day, engineers in white coats, technicians bustling about, and the constant drone of machinery. The Soviet Union's political context is never far from your mind. The pressure to deliver results is like a spectre hanging over everything. Energy quotas must be met, and the plant's performance is a point of pride and propaganda for the Soviet government. Failure is not an option, at least not one you'd want to entertain unless a cozy Siberian labor camp sounds appealing. Inside the control room of reactor number 4, everything seems routine. The room is filled with panels and dials, a cacophony of buttons and switches that would make any tech enthusiast drool. But beneath the surface, the reactor is a diva with a penchant for drama. Its design includes a positive void coefficient, fancy talk for a deadly flaw that makes the reactor more reactive as power decreases, like a rogue chef turning up the heat in a kitchen fire. The air is thick with a mix of cigarette smoke and the underlying tension of workers who know they're part of something bigger than themselves, though they might not understand the full scope yet. The Soviet Union in the 1980s is a complex beast, grappling with economic stagnation, political rigidity, and a population yearning for more than state-controlled TV and queuing for bread. Back to the reactor. It's an engineering marvel in the Soviet playbook, but like a poorly written plot twist, it's not quite as stable as it seems. The RBMK design, while efficient for producing plutonium and electricity, is a bit like juggling chainsaws, impressive until it all goes horribly wrong. By mid-morning, you're well into your shift, and the plant is buzzing along. Outside, the Soviet spring is slowly shaking off the winter chill. Birds might be chirping, though they're likely drowned out by the industrial symphony. It's a normal day, at least by Chernobyl standards, with the usual hustle and bustle. The plant's significance isn't just in its ability to crank out megawatts, it's also a symbol of Soviet prowess. In a world where the Cold War casts a long shadow, nuclear power is as much about politics as it is about energy. The Soviet Union, eager to show its technological might, pushes its nuclear agenda with the same fervor as a new 5-year plan. However, the pressure to meet energy quotas is relentless. It's not just about keeping the lights on in Moscow, it's about showcasing Soviet superiority to the world. Sure, safety might be an afterthought, but in a system that prizes results over caution, who's counting? You grab a quick lunch, a canteen special that probably hasn't changed since Khrushchev was in power. As you chew on what might generously be called meat, you think about the underlying absurdity of it all. Here you are, part of a system that's both powerful and precarious, a cog in the machine that could, at any moment, spin out of control. As the day wears on, you can't shake the feeling that today is different. Maybe it's the strange calm, or perhaps it's just the usual paranoia that comes with working in a place where the stakes are so high. You don't know it yet, but you're standing on the precipice of history. In the afternoon there's talk of a test, a routine safety check meant to simulate a power outage. Nothing to worry about, right? It's just another task on a long list of things to get through before quitting time. The test is meant to gauge how long the turbines can keep the generators going in the event of a power failure. But here's the kicker. This kind of test, which seems straightforward enough, has been postponed several times. The plant's managers are eager to get it done and dusted, but they're about to discover the hard way that haste makes waste, or, in this case, disaster. The political atmosphere adds another layer of complexity. Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union's leader, has introduced policies like glasnost openness and perestroika restructuring in an attempt to revitalize the ailing economy. But change is slow, and the old guard is resistant. The pressure to succeed, to show the world that the Soviet Union is still a formidable power, is immense. It's a high-stakes game, with nuclear power as one of its key players. As you glance at the clock, counting down the hours until you can head home, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. But right now, you're focused on getting through the day, blissfully unaware that in a few short hours, the world's eyes will turn to Chernobyl, and nothing will ever be the same again. As the clock ticks in the control room, you're probably thinking more about that tea than the intricacies of nuclear physics. But hold on to your cup, because what's unfolding isn't just a regular shift. It's the prelude to a nuclear catastrophe that will forever redefine the landscape of energy, politics, and human error. This is the day Chernobyl decided to rewrite the rulebook on disaster. Let's set the scene. It's late afternoon, and the test everyone's been murmuring about is finally happening. The plan is to simulate a power outage to see how long the turbines can keep spinning, generating electricity until the backup generators kick in. Sounds straightforward, right? Like trying to test your car's brakes by driving it off a cliff, except the stakes are a tad higher than your average fender bender. You see, this test has been postponed not once, not twice, but 3 times already, proving that procrastination isn't just a student's prerogative. But with the Soviet Union's reputation on the line, and the test team chomping at the bit to get it over with, they decide to go ahead. However, the day shift crew, who've trained specifically for this, are now off the clock. Instead, you've got the night shift, who, let's say, didn't get the memo. What could possibly go wrong with a team flying blind? Enter Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer. He's the kind of boss who's about as flexible as a Soviet statue, known for his no-nonsense approach. Dyatlov's the guy who believes in pushing limits, and today he's about to push them off a nuclear cliff. Under his watchful eye, the control rods are withdrawn to levels that make seasoned engineers break into a sweat. In the world of nuclear reactors, control rods are like the brakes on a runaway train. Pull them out too far, and you're in trouble. Now, here's where things start to unravel faster than a cheap Soviet sweater. The test requires the reactor to be powered down to a low level, but thanks to a combination of human error and reactor quirks, the power levels plummet alarmingly. Picture a roller coaster that's lost its brakes, careening downwards with no way to stop. Attempts to stabilize the reactor are about as effective as putting out a forest fire with a garden hose. But wait, it gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. The reactor's design flaw, the infamous positive void coefficient, decides to make its grand entrance. This trait means that as the reactor loses water coolant, its power output actually increases, turning the whole operation into a nuclear juggling act. It's like trying to balance a teetering Jenga tower while someone's yanking out the bottom blocks. At this point, you might be wondering, why didn't someone just pull the plug? Great question. But remember, in the Soviet Union, admitting fault is akin to career suicide. Dyatlov, confident or perhaps reckless in his belief that the reactor can handle more, orders the test to continue. The control room crew are caught in a maelstrom of confusion and pressure, a lethal cocktail of arrogance and ignorance. As the test progresses, it's clear things are going off the rails. But instead of calling it quits, they forge ahead. The operators, under Dyatlov's directive, disable safety systems to maintain the test conditions. It's like driving a car at full speed and deciding the seatbelt's just not your style. The decision-making process here is about as sound as a house made of cards, and it's all about to come crashing down. By the time the clock strikes 1023 a.m., the reactor's power levels are fluctuating wildly. The operators, realizing that they've lost control, initiate an emergency shutdown, inserting all the control rods back in. But remember that design flaw? When the rods are inserted quickly, they displace coolant, causing a spike in reactivity. It's the nuclear equivalent of stomping on the brakes of a car that's already skidding on ice. And then it happens. The explosion tears through reactor number 4, spewing radioactive material into the night sky. The force is so immense, it blows the 1,000-ton lid right off the reactor core. It's a sight straight out of a disaster movie, but this is no Hollywood fiction. This is real, and it's catastrophic. In the aftermath, confusion reigns. Workers, bewildered by the scale of the explosion, scramble to understand what just happened. Some believe it's just a hydrogen explosion, not realizing the core itself is exposed and burning. It's chaos, and the true horror of the disaster is only beginning to unfold. As ash and radioactive debris rain down, you might think this is the moment of reckoning. But in true Soviet fashion, the initial response is denial. Because in a system where image is everything, admitting to a nuclear meltdown isn't exactly on the agenda. The operators, the plant management, and even the government are slow to grasp the enormity of the situation. It's a tragic testament to a flawed system, a perfect storm of human error, systemic failings, and a reactor design that was a disaster waiting to happen. The very test, meant to improve safety, has instead triggered one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. Irony, it seems, has a wicked sense of humour. And so, as you stand amid the chaos, that cup of tea you were sipping earlier feels like a lifetime ago. Little do you know, the world will soon be watching, and the name Chernobyl will become synonymous with disaster. But for now, in the eerie glow of the burning reactor, the full magnitude of what's happened is yet to dawn on you and on the world. In the eerie glow of the burning reactor, the full magnitude of what's happened is yet to dawn on you and on the world. But in those first chaotic moments, there's no time for reflection. It's all about reaction, and not in the nuclear sense. You can almost hear the disjointed symphony of alarms, shouts, and the crackling of burning debris, a discordant tune, the likes of which no one ever wants to hear. Enter the unsung heroes of this impending catastrophe, the firefighters. These brave souls, who are more accustomed to extinguishing mundane blazes rather than tackling the fiery maw of a breached reactor, arrive on the scene with a sense of duty that's both commendable and, in retrospect, tragically uninformed. Armed with basic gear, they leap into action, oblivious to the invisible enemy that's already seeping into their bodies. Here's a hard truth wrapped in a heroic myth. These firefighters weren't told they were marching into a radioactive nightmare. Nope, they believed they were dealing with a standard industrial fire. You see, the Soviet playbook at the time didn't exactly emphasize transparency. The higher-ups were more concerned with controlling the narrative than with the well-being of their workers. As the saying goes, what you don't know can't hurt you, except when it's radiation, and it absolutely can. So, with hoses in hand and resolve in their hearts, the firefighters battle the blaze. They work tirelessly, dousing the reactor building with water in an attempt to quell the inferno. Some of them even climb onto the roof, which is a veritable hotbed of radioactive graphite, oblivious to the deadly dose they're receiving. The graphite, spewing from the reactor core, is hotter than a Soviet summer, and not in a good way. It's like standing on a barbecue grill, but instead of a nice steak, you're the one getting cooked. The immediate reaction is all about damage control, but the invisible impact of radiation is insidious. The plant workers and firefighters are exposed to radiation levels that could fry a Geiger counter faster than you can say glasnost. To put it in perspective, the radiation at the core's vicinity is estimated at 20,000 Roentgens per hour. For context, a dose of 500 Roentgens over 5 hours is lethal. These first responders are like human sponges soaking up deadly rays, and they don't even know it yet. Amidst this chaotic scene, the plant structure is compromised, and the radioactive genie is out of the bottle. Plumes of smoke laced with radioactive isotopes begin to drift, carried by the winds like a toxic spectre. The residents of Pripyat, just a stone's throw away, are blissfully unaware that their lives have just been turned upside down. It's like living next to a volcano and being told it's merely a hill with personality. As the morning unfolds, the plant workers continue their attempts to regain control. There's a grim determination, fueled by a mix of Soviet stoicism and sheer disbelief. After all, the Soviet Union's nuclear program was supposed to be its crowning achievement, not a ticking time bomb. But here they are, staring down the barrel of a disaster of monumental proportions. In the midst of this, the Soviet government's response is as slow as a bureaucratic snail. Initially, there's a reluctance to admit the scale of the disaster, because in a regime obsessed with maintaining a facade of infallibility, admitting to a meltdown is like confessing to a cardinal sin. It's not until radiation levels spike across Europe, setting off alarms in Sweden, that the Soviet Union is forced to own up to the nuclear elephant in the room. Yet there's a certain grim romance to the bravery displayed by those on the front lines. Their courage is undeniable, but so is the tragedy of their sacrifice. The firefighters and plant workers, hailed as heroes, are lauded for their bravery while grappling with the tragic reality of a system that valued image over human life. As the day drags on, the true scope of the disaster begins to emerge. The Soviet Union's vaunted nuclear ambitions have been dealt a catastrophic blow, and the world is watching with bated breath. Chernobyl is no longer just a power plant. It's a symbol of both human ingenuity and hubris, a testament to the precarious balance between progress and peril. In the days that follow, the city of Pripyat will be evacuated, its residents leaving behind their lives, possessions, and a haunting reminder of the cost of human error. The initial optimism of Soviet nuclear power is now shrouded in a radioactive cloud, and the world will never look at nuclear energy the same way again. But for now, amidst the chaos and confusion, the immediate focus remains on containment. The workers and firefighters, heroes in every sense of the word, continue their struggle against an unseen foe. Their bravery is the stuff of legends, but the reality is far grimmer. A sobering reminder that even in the face of disaster, the human spirit endures. As Chernobyl's story unfolds, the lessons learned will resonate far beyond the borders of the Soviet Union, shaping the future of nuclear energy and reminding the world of the delicate dance between man and machine. As the dust settles, literally and figuratively, on what can only be described as an unprecedented nuclear catastrophe, the Soviet government swings into action with all the grace of a three-legged racehorse. It's April 27th, just one day after the explosion, and the bureaucratic machinery is churning out more spin than a Soviet record player. The Soviet Union, where admitting defeat is as foreign as rock and roll, is determined to maintain its iron grip on the narrative. After all, in a land where image is king, reality often takes a back seat, sometimes in a trabant. The initial response from the Kremlin is a textbook case of denial. Even as radiation levels spike to alarming highs, the official line is that things are under control. It's like watching someone insist they can juggle flaming torches while their eyebrows smoulder. The mantra of "nothing to see here, comrades," echoes through the halls of power, even as the rest of Europe starts feeling the radioactive pinch. You see, the Soviet Union is keen to keep its dirty laundry firmly hidden, even as it starts leaking into neighboring countries. In the nearby town of Pripyat, life carries on with an eerie semblance of normality. Residents go about their day, unaware that they're living on borrowed time in a radioactive ghost town in the making. The evacuation order won't come until 36 hours after the explosion, a delay that's as baffling as it is catastrophic. It's a decision that's less about safety and more about saving face, because admitting to a nuclear meltdown is like confessing to eating borscht with a fork, utterly unthinkable. Meanwhile, the geopolitical implications of this disaster are starting to seep across borders, much like the radiation itself. Sweden is the first to raise the alarm as its nuclear plant at Forsmark picks up on the elevated radiation levels. It's a bit like realizing your neighbor's barbecue has turned into a forest fire when your smoke detector goes haywire. The Swedish government, puzzled and more than a little concerned, contacts the Soviets, who finally admit that something might be amiss. But the admission is less a confession and more a grudging acknowledgement, akin to admitting your dog might have, possibly, eaten the homework. The Soviet government issues a vague statement about an accident at the Chernobyl plant. No details, No indication of the scale, just a bland, bureaucratic blip on the radar. It's the diplomatic equivalent of shrugging while the house burns down and the rest of the world is left to join the dots. In the West, the initial response is surprisingly muted. The Cold War has taught both sides to tread carefully, and no one wants to be the first to point fingers without a full picture. Plus, there's the little matter of nuclear power being a touchy subject worldwide. Nobody's keen to throw stones when they're living in their own glass reactors. Besides, the Soviets have an uncanny knack for keeping secrets, and getting a straight answer from them is like trying to nail jelly to a wall. But as the days pass, the true scale of the disaster becomes impossible to ignore. Radiation spreads across Europe, carried by the winds like a grim postcard from the Soviet Union. Countries scramble to measure contamination levels, and the realization dawns that this isn't just a Soviet problem, it's a global one. In some parts of Europe, radiation reaches levels 50 times higher than normal. It's not quite glow-in-the-dark territory, but it's enough to make you reconsider that picnic in the park. Back in the USSR, the government's misinformation campaign is running at full throttle. State-controlled media spins a narrative that's about as trustworthy as a used car salesman's pitch. Reports downplay the incident, focusing instead on heroic efforts to contain the disaster. It's propaganda in its purest form, a narrative sewn tighter than a babushka's shawl. Meanwhile, the economic context of the Soviet Union adds another layer to this radioactive onion. The cost of the cleanup is staggering, estimated at 18 billion rubles, a sum that would make any Soviet accountant break out in a cold sweat. For a nation already grappling with economic stagnation, this disaster is a financial black hole, sucking in resources and leaving a trail of fiscal devastation. This is Glasnost and Perestroika's moment of truth. Gorbachev's policies of openness and restructuring are put to the test, and they buckle under the weight of a disaster that demands transparency and accountability. Concepts that are about as welcome as a snowstorm in July. The Soviet Union's image, once a monolithic bastion of strength, is cracking under the strain, revealing the fragility beneath. As the fallout, both literal and metaphorical, settles, the world is left to grapple with the implications. Chernobyl becomes a cautionary tale, a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the cost of human error. It's a stark reminder that in the dance between progress and peril, the margin for error is razor thin. And yet, in this tale of disaster and denial, there's a grim fascination with the human spirit's resilience. The Soviet machine may be churning out propaganda, but the individual acts of bravery, the selflessness of those who stepped into the radioactive breach, shine through. It's a story of contradiction, a blend of heroism and hubris, where the lines between good intentions and grave mistakes blur into a cautionary tale for the ages. As the Soviet Union grapples with the fallout, both nuclear and political, the rest of the world watches, a front-row seat to the unfolding drama. The name Chernobyl will never be the same, etched into history as a symbol of both human ingenuity and its capacity for error. But for now, the story is far from over. There are lessons to learn, myths to debunk, and a future to navigate in the shadow of the reactor's ghostly glow. As the dust settles, both metaphorically and literally, on this nuclear nightmare, we find ourselves staring at the sprawling web of consequences that radiate, much like the invisible isotopes themselves, from this epicenter of disaster. It's April 27, 1986, and Pripyat is finally waking up to the grim reality that fallout isn't just a political term. The evacuation order, long overdue and wrapped in bureaucratic red tape, finally hits the airwaves. Residents, told they'd be away for just a few days, packed light. Spoiler alert, they'll never return. It's a poignant reminder that when the government says temporary, it might as well be planning your permanent vacation. With 49,000 people hurriedly piling into buses and trucks, Pripyat transforms from a bustling town to a ghostly relic. It's like watching a magic trick where the entire audience disappears, leaving behind nothing but echoes of lives abruptly paused. The Soviet authorities, in their characteristic fashion, try to keep the exodus low-key, but you can't exactly sneakily evacuate a city. If this were a movie, the evacuation scene would be set to a dramatic score, but in reality it was a silent march into uncertainty. As evening descends, the long-term impact of this disaster begins to unfurl like a tragic tapestry. The environmental consequences are nothing short of apocalyptic. The term Chernobyl exclusion zone enters the lexicon, a 2,600 square kilometre area where "do not enter" is the understatement of the century. This zone becomes a haunting testament to human folly and nature's slow, tenacious reclamation. Wildlife, unfazed by human absence, begins to thrive in this radioactive Eden. Elk, wolves and wild boars roam freely, unaware that they're the stars of an unintended experiment in nature's resilience. You see, nature has a knack for bouncing back, even in the shadow of human blunders. But the human cost? That's a whole different beast. The Soviet Union initially reports a measly 31 deaths, a number that's as believable as a politician's promise. In reality, the long-term health consequences are staggering. The World Health Organization estimates that up to 4,000 people will eventually die from radiation exposure, while other studies suggest numbers as high as 93,000. It's a grim reminder that statistics often sanitize the soul-crushing reality of lives lost and communities fractured. Health issues ripple through the affected regions like aftershocks. Thyroid cancer cases skyrocket, particularly among children exposed to radioactive iodine. It's a cruel irony that the very technology meant to propel humanity forward has instead inflicted a legacy of pain. Chernobyl becomes a byword for disaster, its very name evoking images of mutation and decay. It's a stark lesson in the cost of hubris and the dangers of cutting corners when the stakes are nuclear. In the grand tapestry of history, Chernobyl plays a crucial role in accelerating the Soviet Union's decline. By the late 1980s, the cracks in the Soviet facade are widening. The disaster exposes the systemic inefficiencies and the government's penchant for secrecy over safety. Gorbachev, already grappling with economic stagnation and the Herculean task of reform, finds the disaster an albatross around his neck. The costs of clean-up and containment balloon to an estimated 18 billion rubles, further straining an economy that's less a powerhouse and more a sputtering engine on life support. The political implications are profound. Chernobyl becomes a symbol of the Soviet system's failings, a catalyst for change in a country desperately clinging to the past. It's like trying to fix a leaky boat with duct tape. The intent is there, but the underlying issues are too deep. Glasnost, Gorbachev's policy of openness, ironically finds new life in the wake of the disaster. The Soviet citizens, once fed a steady diet of propaganda, start questioning the narrative. The genie is out of the bottle, and there's no shoving it back in with more state-controlled media. As the Soviet Union stumbles into the 1990s, Chernobyl's shadow looms large. Economic and political pressures mount, and by 1991, the once mighty superpower collapses. The disaster, while not the sole cause, is a significant factor in the unraveling of the Soviet tapestry. It's a testament to the power of a single event to tip the scales of history, a reminder that even the most imposing regimes can crumble when faced with their own vulnerabilities. Fast forward to today, and Chernobyl's legacy continues to resonate. The site has become a macabre tourist attraction, drawing visitors with a taste for the morbid and the curious. It's a place where history's echoes are tangible, where the silence speaks volumes about human error and resilience. The world has learned, albeit the hard way, that nuclear energy, while powerful, requires respect and caution. Safety protocols have been overhauled worldwide, and the spectre of Chernobyl serves as a constant reminder of what's at stake. Yet, despite the lessons learned, there's a strange allure to the story of Chernobyl. It's a tale of tragedy and triumph, of human error and nature's resilience. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of dates and events, but a living narrative shaped by human choices and their consequences. The romantic notion of nuclear power as a panacea for energy woes is tempered by the harsh reality of its potential for devastation. It's a narrative woven with the threads of hope, hubris, and the indomitable human spirit. As evening blankets the exclusion zone, the silence is profound yet deceptive. Beneath the surface, life persists, adapting and enduring in the face of adversity. It's a fitting metaphor for humanity's own journey, a delicate balance between progress and preservation, between ambition and humility. Chernobyl stands as a monument to both our greatest achievements and our gravest mistakes, a testament to the enduring complexity of the human condition. And so, as we draw the curtain on this chapter of history, we're left with a story that's as much about the future as it is about the past. Chernobyl isn't just a relic of the Cold War era, it's a reminder of our shared responsibility to tread carefully in the realm of scientific advancement. As we look to the horizon, the lessons of Chernobyl linger, a cautionary tale for the ages, urging us to embrace progress with prudence and to remember that the past, no matter how buried, has a way of shaping the future. Genghis Khan didn't just roll out of bed one day and decide to conquer half the world. Nope. His origin story is more like a rags to riches tale featuring steppe politics, family betrayal, and sheer grit. Born in 1162, give or take a few years, because Mongolian birth records weren't exactly precise, he entered the world as Temujin. His early life was a study in scrappiness. Picture a kid who'd later be the world's most infamous conqueror, yet started off with less than what you'd find in a vending machine of empire-building tools. Temujin's dad, Yesuge, was a minor chieftain, which sounds fancy until you realize that in the cutthroat world of 12th century Mongolia, being a minor chieftain was a bit like owning a small coffee shop in a town full of Starbucks. Yesuge managed to score a political marriage for young Temujin with Bertay, a union that would later become a cornerstone of Genghis's power. But plot twist, Yesuge got poisoned by a rival clan. Classic Mongolian drama. This left Temujin fatherless at the age of 9, which in medieval steppe society was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Without Yesuge, Temujin's family was cast out by their own tribe. It's one of those moments where you realize that family loyalty on the steppes was about as reliable as a sandcastle during high tide. Abandoned and left to fend for themselves, Temujin's family was forced to live on wild fruits and rodents, a diet that's less paleo and more desperate survival. But here's where the myth-busting kicks in. While Genghis Khan would later be known for his military prowess, his early successes were due to shrewd diplomacy. He was the original networker, forging alliances with other tribes through marriage and strategic partnerships. It's said that Temujin's first real break came from an alliance with the powerful Ung Khan, leader of the Kerite tribe. This was the medieval version of getting a LinkedIn recommendation from a Fortune 500 CEO. Now, if you've ever heard the story of Temujin's blood brother Jamuka, you'll know it's often cast in the light of a tragic bromance gone sour. The two were as close as siblings, until they weren't. Their eventual fallout is usually painted as an epic personal betrayal, but let's be real, it was all about power. Jamuka and Temujin's split was less soap opera and more Game of Thrones. Their rivalry culminated in the Battle of Dalan Balshut in 1187, where Temujin got his first taste of defeat. It's like the universe was saying, not so fast, kid. Temujin didn't sulk or retreat into obscurity. Instead, he used this setback as a learning opportunity. By 1190, he had amassed a powerful following, thanks in no small part to his unique ability to unite disparate tribes. He was like the ultimate steppe DJ, mixing and matching alliances to create a powerful tribe under his leadership. By the time he officially became Genghis Khan in 1206, he had gathered a coalition of tribes that stretched across Mongolia. It was as if he'd taken a chaotic jigsaw puzzle and turned it into a formidable war machine. Now, about those myths of Genghis Khan's brutality? Sure, the guy could be ruthless, but he wasn't a mindless barbarian. His conquests were built on a foundation of strategic diplomacy. For instance, he offered his enemies a choice: join me and enjoy peace and prosperity, or resist and face the consequences. Many chose the former, which was a far more pragmatic choice than it might seem. This wasn't just about waving a bloody sword, it was about creating a sustainable empire. Let's throw some numbers into the mix. By the time he unified the Mongol tribes, Genghis commanded a force of about 20,000 men. This wasn't a mob of marauding savages, it was a disciplined, loyal army. His ability to integrate conquered peoples into his military was revolutionary. He allowed local leaders to maintain power as long as they pledged allegiance to him, a smart move that minimized resistance and maximized resources. It was less, destroy everything, and more, let's make a deal. And then there was his legal brilliance. The Yasa, a code of laws attributed to Genghis, was ahead of its time. It was designed not only to maintain order, but also to unify his diverse empire. Rules like outlawing the kidnapping of women and prohibiting the theft of livestock made sense in a society where such actions could spark blood feuds. By enforcing these laws, Genghis ensured stability and loyalty among his subjects. In terms of strategy, Genghis Khan was a genius. He understood the importance of intelligence and communication long before the age of emails and encrypted messaging apps. His system of relay stations, called YAM, allowed messages to travel at lightning speed across his vast empire. It was like the Pony Express on steroids, and it gave him a tactical edge over less organized foes. So, as we delve into the life and times of Genghis Khan, let's remember that his rise wasn't just about swinging swords and burning villages. It was a masterclass in strategic alliances, innovative leadership, and pragmatic governance. As much as history loves a villain, Genghis Khan's story is a reminder that sometimes the most fearsome conquerors are also the most astute statesmen. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll dig deeper into his empire-building antics and how he turned the vast steppes into the heart of a sprawling empire. Let's dive into the whirlwind of tactics and diplomacy that Genghis Khan wielded like a maestro, conducting a symphony of chaos and order. The guy was a master of turning chaos into opportunity, making Sun Tzu look like an amateur. The Mongol army wasn't just a horde of horsemen galloping across the steppes. It was a well-oiled machine of war and cunning diplomacy. And Genghis was the ultimate conductor, orchestrating victories with a blend of fear, intelligence, and a wicked sense of timing. First up, let's talk psychological warfare, a term that Genghis might as well have trademarked. He knew that the mind was his most potent weapon. Enemy soldiers would quake in their boots long before the Mongols even came into sight. Genghis was like the original social media influencer, spreading his reputation for brutality far and wide. Villagers often surrendered without a fight, preferring the Mongol yoke to having their entire existence wiped off the map. It was a strategy that saved manpower and resources. Why wage war when you can win by reputation? Genghis also had a knack for intelligence gathering that would put modern spies to shame. His network of scouts and informants was as widespread as it was effective. These weren't just guys with binoculars. They were adept at blending in, gathering intel, and reporting back faster than a tweet goes viral. The YAM system, that nifty relay chain we mentioned earlier, wasn't just for pizza deliveries. It allowed Genghis to stay one step ahead of his enemies, playing a game of chess while they were still trying to figure out checkers. But let's not forget about his savvy negotiations. Genghis was the kind of guy who could sell ice to an Eskimo and make them feel like they got a great deal. He'd often send emissaries ahead of his army to make peace overtures, offering local rulers a choice: submit willingly and enjoy autonomy under Mongol protection, or resist and face annihilation. It was the original offer you can't refuse, and many pragmatic leaders chose submission, seeing the writing on the wall, or perhaps the sword. And then there was the matter of turning enemies into allies. Genghis had an uncanny ability to flip the script, often integrating conquered peoples into his own ranks. Not just as cannon fodder, mind you, but as valued members of his administration and military. This wasn't some kumbaya moment. It was a cold, calculated strategy to bolster his forces and maintain control. For instance, he famously recruited skilled Chinese engineers and administrators, recognizing that their expertise could strengthen his burgeoning empire. It was like the ultimate corporate merger where everyone got stock options. Of course, there was the occasional sprinkle of bribery to grease the wheels of diplomacy. Genghis understood that even the fiercest loyalty could be bought at the right price. Whether it was gold, land, or a cushy position within his administration, he knew how to make offers that were hard to resist. This wasn't just bribery for bribery's sake. It was a strategic investment in the stability and expansion of his empire. Genghis's ability to blend fear and favor was legendary. He had the foresight to know that an empire built solely on fear would eventually crumble. So he offered a blend of incentives and intimidation that kept his subjects in line. The legal code of the Yasa was enforced with an iron fist, but it also provided a sense of order and fairness that was rare for the time. It was like promising both the carrot and the stick, ensuring that his empire didn't just survive. It thrived. Now, a word about the myth of the bloodthirsty barbarian. Sure, Genghis didn't exactly have a soft spot for his enemies, but his brutality was calculated, not wanton. His military campaigns were meticulously planned, often minimizing unnecessary slaughter to conserve resources and maintain stability. This wasn't some Hollywood villain cackling over a pile of skulls. It was a leader who understood the value of life when it served his purpose. So next time someone tells you Genghis was just a marauding savage, remind them of the man who built an empire with brains as much as brawn. As we continue to explore Genghis Khan's empire-building antics, remember that his success was no accident. It was the result of a strategic mind that could see beyond the horizon, both literally and figuratively. In the coming chapters, we'll delve further into how he transformed the vast steppes into the heart of a sprawling empire, a feat that continues to boggle the minds of historians and enthusiasts alike. Stay tuned for more tales of cunning, conquest, and the sheer audacity of a man who left an indelible mark on history. So, speaking of Genghis Khan's empire-building antics, let's take a wild ride into the administrative marvels that were the true backbone of his sprawling dominion. Forget about the dramatic horseback charges for a minute, and let's talk about how he turned the Mongol Empire into a well-oiled machine that could rival the Swiss watchmakers of the future. This wasn't just about conquering lands, it was about keeping them running smoothly and profitably. And boy did Genghis have a knack for it. First off, trade routes. Genghis Khan turned the Silk Road into his personal autobahn. Imagine a world where a hodgepodge of disconnected trails suddenly morphs into a superhighway of commerce and culture. Under his rule, the Silk Road wasn't just a dusty path for a few intrepid merchants, it was a bustling artery of economic life stretching from China to the Mediterranean. We're talking about a trade network that would make Amazon look like a neighborhood lemonade stand. The Mongols safeguarded these routes with military precision, ensuring the traders could move their goods without fear of bandits. This was a game changer, folks. Goods, ideas, and even people flowed like never before, creating a vibrant cultural exchange that would shape the world for centuries. Now, you might wonder, why would a fierce warrior like Genghis care about trade routes? Simple, economics, my dear Watson. By securing these routes, the Mongol Empire raked in massive wealth through taxes and tolls, filling their coffers with silver, silk, spices, and all sorts of goodies. It was like setting up a toll booth on every major highway and collecting a fortune in change. But Genghis wasn't just about collecting fees. He knew that a prosperous trade network meant a prosperous empire, an empire less likely to rebel when everyone had a little more coin in their pocket. Trade wasn't the only network Genghis revolutionized. Enter the YAM system, a communication network that would make even the ancient Romans envious. Picture a relay network of well-supplied stations every 20 to 30 miles, where messengers could swap exhausted horses for fresh ones and keep galloping across the empire at breakneck speed. This system allowed Genghis to maintain control over vast distances, communicating orders, gathering intelligence, and staying one step ahead of any would-be usurpers. It was the medieval equivalent of high-speed internet, and it kept the empire as tightly knit as a family at Thanksgiving dinner, minus the awkward political debates. And speaking of family, let's chat about Genghis's legal code, the Yasa. It was less of a written document and more of an oral tradition, but don't let that fool you. It was as binding as any legal parchment. The Yasa was Genghis's way of saying, we might be diverse, but under this empire we play by the same rules. It outlawed theft, protected women, and even regulated hunting to preserve game for future generations. It was like a Swiss Army knife of laws, covering everything from serious crimes to social etiquette. In a world where tribal feuds could last generations, the Yasa brought a sense of order that was as refreshing as a cold drink on a hot day. Now, here's where things get interesting. Genghis, the fearsome conqueror, was also a champion of religious tolerance. Yeah, you heard that right. Unlike many rulers who tried to enforce a single religion, Genghis was more of a live and let pray kind of guy. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and shamans all found a place in his realm, free to worship as they pleased. This wasn't just a moment of spiritual enlightenment, it was a shrewd political move. By allowing religious freedom, Genghis avoided alienating any particular group, ensuring their loyalty and, more importantly, their taxes. After all, it's hard to rebel when you're busy praying for prosperity. Economically, these strategies were like rocket fuel for the Mongol Empire's growth. The increased trade brought in wealth, while the Yasa ensured stability and religious tolerance kept the populace content. The result? An empire that didn't just survive, but thrived, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, with a GDP that would make modern economists weep with envy. Of course, this isn't to say everything was sunshine and roses. The Mongol administration had its challenges. Maintaining such a vast territory required constant vigilance and savvy governance. Genghis's successors had to juggle the complexities of managing diverse cultures, languages, and economies. But the foundations laid by Genghis himself were rock solid, allowing subsequent Khans to build upon his legacy with relative ease. So, as we delve further into the intricacies of Genghis Khan's empire, remember that his success wasn't just about the sword. It was about smart governance, strategic economic policies, and an uncanny understanding of human nature's complexities. It's a story that defies the simplistic narratives of bloodthirsty conquest and reveals a leader who was as much a statesman as he was a warrior. Stay tuned for more insights into how this enigmatic figure reshaped the medieval world, leaving an indelible mark on history that echoes through time. So, we've got Genghis Khan, the ultimate multitasker who managed to turn a ragtag assembly of tribes into the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen. But while his empire's achievements are often romanticized, let's face it, the journey there wasn't all silk and spices. It was more like a gritty, blood-soaked road trip with a few detours into realpolitik and sheer audacity. Genghis was playing the Game of Thrones centuries before George R.R. Martin even picked up a pen. Let's tackle some of the myths surrounding Genghis Khan, starting with the notion that he was some sort of barbarian king, swinging his sword with reckless abandon. Sure, he could be ruthless, but calling him a barbarian is like calling a master chess player a checkers enthusiast. His campaigns were less about mindless destruction and more about cold, calculating strategy. The Secret History of the Mongols, a primary source penned in the 13th century, offers a glimpse into his methods. It's like the behind-the-scenes documentary of Genghis's life, showing us a leader who was as much about brawn as he was about brawn. Take the siege of Nishapur, for instance. In 1221, Genghis unleashed the full might of the Mongol war machine on this Persian city. The result? A massacre that left 1.7 million dead, according to some sources. Sure, those numbers might be exaggerated. Let's not forget medieval chroniclers had a flair for the dramatic, but it paints a vivid picture of the terror the Mongol name inspired. Yet, beneath the bloodshed was a strategy to ensure that no one ever dared defy him again. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal, the kind of PR campaign that would make even Machiavelli raise an eyebrow. But let's not get too swept up in the blood-soaked tales. The romanticized vision of Genghis as a merciless conqueror often overshadows his genuine attempts at building a stable and prosperous empire. His realpolitik decision-making was nothing short of genius. For example, he valued merit over nobility, promoting individuals based on talent rather than birthright. This was revolutionary in a world where aristocracy often trumped ability. It's like he was running a medieval version of a merit-based corporate ladder, elevating the best and the brightest to positions of power. And then there's the economic context, often glossed over in favor of tales of conquest. Genghis understood that wealth wasn't just about looting and pillaging, it was about sustainable growth. By integrating conquered peoples into his empire, he didn't just add territories, he added taxpayers. The Mongol postal system, the yam, wasn't just for sending battle orders, it was also a way to facilitate trade and collect taxes efficiently. Imagine a world where your taxes actually contributed to an efficient postal service. Revolutionary, right? We can't ignore the harsh realities of his campaigns, though. Genghis's strategy was often a brutal mix of diplomacy and destruction. He'd send envoys to negotiate peace, but if they were harmed or rejected, he'd unleash hell. Case in point, the Khwarezmian Empire. When a Mongol trade caravan was massacred under the orders of the Khwarezmian Shah, Genghis responded with an invasion that decimated the region. It was less about revenge and more about sending a message, cross me at your peril. Now, let's talk numbers. By the end of his reign, Genghis had expanded his empire to cover nearly 9 million square miles. That's roughly the size of Africa, folks. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, a testament to his unparalleled ability to unite disparate tribes under a single banner. It's like he was running a medieval version of a multinational corporation, with branches on every continent. But was it all worth it? The romanticism of his legacy often glosses over the human cost. Millions perished in his campaigns, cities were razed, and cultures were irrevocably altered. Yet, his legacy also includes a Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace that allowed trade, culture, and technology to flourish across the vast Mongol Empire. It's a paradox that historians still grapple with. Can we separate the conqueror from the administrator? And speaking of legacies, let's not forget the genetic one. According to a 2003 genetic study, around 16 million men in Central Asia share a Y chromosome lineage that traces back to a single ancestor living about 1,000 years ago, likely Genghis Khan himself. Talk about leaving your mark on history. In examining Genghis Khan's life and legacy, it's clear that the truth is far more complex than the myths suggest. He was neither the bloodthirsty barbarian nor the benevolent ruler of legend. Instead, he was a pragmatic leader who understood that power was as much about perception as it was about reality. His story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry woven from threads of both triumph and tragedy. So as we look forward to the next chapter in this saga, let's keep in mind that Genghis Khan's empire was a living, breathing entity, a testament to the power of vision, strategy, and, yes, a bit of luck. The tale of Genghis Khan is not just one of conquest but of transformation, a reminder that even the most fearsome figures in history are often driven by motives that are as relatable as they are ruthless. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of this enigmatic leader's life, exploring how his legacy continues to shape our world today. So, here we are, at the grand finale of Genghis Khan's sprawling saga, ready to unravel the long-term impacts of his rule and empire. If history were a dinner party, Genghis would be the guest who left a mark on every conversation, whether you liked him or not. But his legacy isn't just about his conquests. It's about how his diplomatic strategies laid the groundwork for what we now consider modern statecraft. Let's talk about those diplomatic strategies for a second. Genghis wasn't just a whiz on the battlefield. He knew that the pen, or the diplomatic envoy in his case, could be mightier than the sword. His approach to governance was revolutionary for its time. By integrating diverse cultures and legal systems, he effectively created a prototype for multicultural empires. His empire was a patchwork quilt of ethnicities and religions, each contributing to a larger whole under a unified legal framework. It's like he was running a medieval United Nations where the common language was power and the currency was loyalty. One of Genghis's standout achievements was his emphasis on meritocracy. By promoting individuals based on ability rather than aristocratic birth, he laid the foundation for a more equitable governmental structure. It was basically a 13th century shake-up of the old boys' club, and it worked wonders for his administration. This approach has echoes in today's corporate and governmental systems where talent often trumps pedigree, at least in theory. It's as if Genghis was centuries ahead in realizing that competent leadership is the backbone of any enduring empire. Now, let's shift gears and talk economics. Genghis's empire was a colossal marketplace stretching over 9 million square miles, facilitating trade on a scale previously unimaginable. This wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving ideas, technology, and culture. The Silk Road, under Mongol protection, became the superhighway of the medieval world. Think of it as the Amazon Prime of its time, delivering not just spices and silk, but also innovations like papermaking and gunpowder. This exchange laid the groundwork for the Renaissance, as ideas from the East flowed into the West, sparking new ways of thinking that would shape the modern world. But here's the kicker. Genghis's legacy isn't all glitter and gold-plated yurts. Let's not romanticize the devastation that came with his campaigns. Cities were razed, populations were decimated, and entire cultures were altered or erased. It's the uncomfortable truth that sits alongside his administrative genius. The Mongol Empire was built on both innovation and intimidation, a duality that continues to spark debate among historians. It's like being awed by the beauty of a painting while knowing it was achieved with a very bloody brush. Fast forward to today, and Genghis Khan remains a polarizing figure. In Mongolia, he's celebrated as a national hero, the founding father of a nation that once ruled the world. His likeness adorns everything from currency to vodka bottles, a testament to his enduring influence. Yet, in other parts of the world, his name is synonymous with destruction and terror. This dichotomy illustrates how historical narratives are shaped by cultural perspectives. It's a bit like looking at a Rorschach test. What you see often says more about you than the inkblot itself. Let's also consider the genetic legacy Genghis Khan left behind. That 2003 study I mentioned earlier, it's a stark reminder of his personal influence. The idea that one man could have such a widespread genetic impact is both fascinating and a bit unsettling. It's a DNA footprint that serves as a biological testament to his far-reaching power and the integration of his empire. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Genghis Khan's life and legacy, it's clear that his impact on global history is as complex as it is profound. He was a man of contradictions, a brutal conqueror and a brilliant statesman, a unifier and a destroyer, a visionary and a tyrant. His story is a reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and battles, but a tapestry woven from the myriad threads of human experience. In the end, Genghis Khan's legacy is like a kaleidoscope, ever-shifting, multifaceted, and open to interpretation. It's a testament to the enduring power of leadership and the profound effects it can have on the world. Whether you view him as a hero or a villain, there's no denying that Genghis Khan was a pivotal figure in the story of humanity. And as we close the book on this chapter of history, we're left with the understanding that the echoes of his reign still resonate today, reminding us that the past is never truly past. It's a living, breathing part of our present, shaping the world in ways both seen and unseen. In the world of ancient Greek history, Sparta is the rock star that never quite left the stage. It's the stuff of legends, an ancient world that was both revered and feared, where the warriors were as legendary as their peculiar social norms. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of Spartan life, let's talk about the man supposedly at the center of it all, Lycurgus, the enigmatic, possibly mythical, lawgiver who's credited or blamed, depending on your perspective, with turning Sparta into a boot camp for badassery. Now, Lycurgus is a bit of a historical enigma. Was he real? Was he just a convenient scapegoat for the Spartan way of life? Nobody knows for sure, and that's part of the fun. Even the ancient historians couldn't agree. Herodotus, the father of lies. Histories mentions him, and so does Plutarch, who seems to have had a bit of a man-crush on the guy. According to the stories, Lycurgus pops up sometime around the 9th century BCE, a time when the world was still figuring out what to do with this whole civilization concept. Lycurgus supposedly laid down the law, literally. He's said to have journeyed to the Oracle of Delphi, which was basically ancient Greece's version of Google, for some divine inspiration. With a thumbs up from the gods, he returned to Sparta with the Great Retra, a set of reforms that would make any modern-day drill sergeant weep with pride. These reforms turned Sparta into a state devoted almost entirely to military prowess. Forget civilian life. Everything was geared towards creating warriors who could give the Hulk a run for his money. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the tales of Spartan valor. The reality? It was all a bit more complicated and a lot less heroic. For starters, these legendary warriors didn't just spring out of the ground, fully armed like some kind of Greek action figure. They emerged from a society that was, to put it mildly, oppressive. When your entire social structure is built on the backs of the helots, an enslaved population that outnumbered the Spartans by a margin that would make any statistician wince, you've got to ask some questions. The helots were essentially the economic engine of Sparta. Think of them as the ancient version of the 99%, doing all the work while the top 1%, the Spartan citizens, focused on perfecting the art of war. These poor souls were tasked with farming the land, supporting the Spartan diet of black broth, a dish so unappetizing that it makes kale smoothies look indulgent. And while the helots toiled, the Spartans trained, starting their military education at the tender age of 7 in the agoge, a brutal system that prioritized discipline and conformity over, say, a well-rounded education. The dynamics between Spartans and helots were, unsurprisingly, tense. Spartans lived in constant fear of a helot uprising, which is what happens when you oppress a majority and force them to do all your dirty work. To keep things in check, the Spartans devised the Crypteia, a kind of secret police force that would make George Orwell nod in grim recognition. Young Spartan men were encouraged to roam the countryside, terrorizing helots to remind them of their place. It was an annual event, like a macabre version of the Olympics, minus the medals and olive wreaths. So, while the Spartan image is all about glory and valor, remember that it was also about maintaining a strict social order with some seriously questionable ethics. The whole system was built on fear, both the fear of external threats and the internal fear of rebellion. This is where the romanticized version of Sparta meets the brutal truth. Sure, they were tough, but their strength came at a cost, the freedom and dignity of those they dominated. And yet, there's something undeniably intriguing about the Spartan way. It's the ultimate human drama. Courage, oppression, power, and survival played out on a grand stage with real stakes. The Spartan myth endures because it taps into our fascination with the extremes of human society. It's a reminder of what happens when a culture goes all in on one aspect of life, for better or worse. So, next time you think about the Spartans and their place in history, remember the helots too. They were the silent majority, the unseen faces who kept the wheels turning, the unsung heroes, or victims, depending on how you look at it, of the Spartan story. Without them, the legend of Sparta might have been just another forgotten chapter in history, lost to time like so many others. And that, my friends, is the gritty reality lurking behind the polished legend. Now, speaking of the gritty reality behind those polished Greek legends, let's take a stroll down the dusty paths of the Spartan education system, the Agoge. Picture a school that makes Hogwarts look like a summer camp. These boys weren't just learning the 3 R's, they were mastering the art of war. At the tender age of 7, when most kids today are grappling with spelling tests and snack time, Spartan boys were shipped off to the Agoge. Their curriculum? Less about algebra and more about abs. The whole thing was designed to craft warriors tougher than a $2 steak, and, as if it wasn't tough enough, they were encouraged to steal their food. Why? Because, apparently, being caught meant you'd failed the lesson in stealth, not that you were hungry. Forget about detention, get caught pilfering an apple, and you'd get a flogging instead. The Spartan boy's life was the ultimate survival of the fittest, where even a sandwich was a strategic acquisition. But why all this Spartan simplicity, you ask? Was it some noble, minimalist philosophy? More like an economic necessity. Sparta wasn't exactly rolling in drachmas. While Athens was busy inventing democracy and philosophy, Sparta was counting its pennies or lack thereof. This frugality was both a practical measure and a political one. Living simply kept the citizens focused and, let's be honest, kept the helots from getting any wild ideas about wealth distribution. Spartan simplicity was less about zen and more about zero options. Now, before you think the Spartan men were the only ones living the hard-knock life, let's talk about the women. In a twist that would make any feminist historian do a double-take, Spartan women actually had more rights than their sisters elsewhere in Greece. They could own property, get an education, and were expected to be physically fit. The idea was that strong women would birth strong warriors, and so they trained just like the men. Minus the whole ogreish ordeal, thank heavens. Spartan women were the original CrossFit enthusiasts, but don't let that fool you into thinking they had it easy. While they had more freedom, it came with its own set of societal pressures. Women were expected to manage the household while their men were off playing soldier, and they were tasked with producing the next generation of warriors. No pressure, right? Despite this relative freedom, Spartan women still faced the same overarching societal pressure to conform. The state was everything, and individuality was as welcome as a snowstorm in July. Everything from how they dressed to how they raised their children was dictated by the needs of the state. So, while they could own land, they couldn't escape the long arm of Spartan societal expectations. What's fascinating here is the duality of the Spartan myth. On one hand, you've got this society that, on paper, seems to empower women more than any other in ancient Greece. Yet, on the other hand, it's the same society that demands absolute allegiance and conformity. It's like being given the keys to a sports car, but being told you can only drive it around the block. Sure, you've got rights, but you're still very much part of the Spartan machine, expected to keep it running smoothly. So, why does this Spartan legend endure? Maybe it's the allure of their uncompromising dedication to an ideal, no matter how flawed. There's a certain romance in their absolute commitment to the state, to martial prowess, to simplicity. But beneath that polished veneer lies a society built on the backs of the oppressed, driven by fear and bound by rigid expectations. It's a tale as old as time, really, one that combines the best and worst of human nature in a single, compelling narrative. As we delve deeper into the Spartan saga, remember this: history is rarely black and white. It's a complex tapestry of human ambition, fear, and survival. The Spartans might have been legendary warriors, but their legacy is a mixed bag of glory and oppression, freedom and conformity, simplicity and necessity. And as we continue to unravel their story, keep in mind that behind every legend lies a gritty, often uncomfortable truth. Now, as we lace up our sandals and step into the political arena of ancient Sparta, let's talk about a dual kingship that sounds like it came out of a Game of Thrones episode. Yes, that's right, 2 kings, because apparently one was just too mainstream for the Spartans. This political oddity was like giving 2 CEOs the keys to the same company with the hope they wouldn't burn the place down. And surprisingly, it worked. Kind of. The dual kingship system was part of the Spartan constitution, supposedly crafted by our elusive friend Lycurgus, though Plutarch might have had a hand in embroidering the narrative. These kings hailed from 2 dynastic families, the Agiads and the Eurypontids. Imagine a family feud that lasted centuries, but instead of fighting over Thanksgiving dinner, they were duking it out over military campaigns and religious rituals. Each king had his own set of responsibilities. One would lead the army into battle, while the other stayed back to make sure the state didn't implode. It was a classic case of divide and conquer, but with a twist. They had to work together to govern effectively, which sounds a bit like asking a dog and a cat to share a litter box. This duality wasn't just for show. It was a clever system of checks and balances meant to prevent either king from going full dictator. And if you think 2 kings would have been enough to keep things in line, think again. Enter the Gerousia, the Spartan Council of Elders, which was about as close to a senate as you could get in the ancient world, comprised of 28 elders over the age of 60, because who doesn't love a bit of geriatric wisdom? And the 2 kings, this was the body responsible for crafting laws and policies. Their combined age probably added up to several millennia, which was great for wisdom, but not so much for fresh ideas. The Gerousia wielded significant power, acting as a stabilizing force in the Spartan political landscape. They could propose legislation, served as a high court, and, perhaps most importantly, they decided who became the next king if one of the reigning monarchs decided to take a permanent vacation to the underworld. It was like a political cocktail, stirred with a hefty dose of geriatric authority. But what about the common Spartan citizens, you ask? Did they have a say? Enter the Apella, the assembly of Spartan males over the age of 30. This was Sparta's version of democracy, or at least a very Spartan take on it. The Apella would gather to vote on matters proposed by the Gerousia, though vote might be a generous term. Instead of ballots, decisions were made by shouting. That's right, whoever yelled the loudest won. Forget reasoned debate, it was more like a rowdy sports match where the loudest fan decided the score. This political structure might sound like a recipe for chaos, but for Sparta it worked. At least until it didn't. The focus on militarism shaped every political decision, often to the detriment of innovation. While Athens was busy inventing philosophy and drama, Sparta was perfecting the art of war, like a one-hit wonder band that couldn't get past its first album. The Gerousia, with its emphasis on maintaining tradition, ensured that Sparta stayed true to its martial roots. Change was about as welcome as a pimple on prom night. All this militaristic focus came at a cost. Sparta's economy was less a bustling marketplace and more a subsistence model reliant on the helots, those unsung labourers we mentioned earlier. With the citizenry preoccupied with their military duties, commerce and trade took a back seat. Spartans weren't exactly known for their entrepreneurial spirit, and why would they be? When your life revolves around keeping your abs rock hard and your spear sharp, who has time for a side hustle? The Spartan political machine, with its dual kingship and councils, was all about maintaining a delicate balance. The system was designed to ensure stability, but it also stifled growth. Sure, they had a military that could give any neighbouring city-state pause, but when it came to cultural or economic advancements, they were about as cutting-edge as a rotary phone. Yet, there's something undeniably captivating about this Spartan experiment in governance. It's a reminder of the lengths to which a society will go to maintain order and power, even if it means sacrificing creativity and progress. While the dual kingship and the councils created a stable, if rigid, political atmosphere, the cost was a society that remained stuck in a perpetual loop of militaristic fervour. So, as we ponder the intricacies of Spartan politics, remember this: The Spartan legend is as much about what was sacrificed as it is about what was achieved. It's a story of a society that went all in on its military ethos, creating a legacy that would echo through the ages, both for its brilliance and its blind spots. And as we continue our exploration of Sparta's storied past, keep in mind that every legend has its limits, and the Spartans were no exception. Let's shift gears from the political chessboard to the battlefield, where the Spartan warrior myth truly flexes its muscle. If you've ever watched a Hollywood blockbuster, you'd think Spartans were an ancient breed of superheroes, all capes and chiseled abs, tossing around phrases like, "This is Sparta," while sending enemies into a bottomless pit. But let's peel back the layers of that cinematic bravado to reveal a more grounded reality, one that wasn't all slow-motion kicks and CGI-enhanced biceps. First things first, the Spartan warrior myth is rooted in the agoge, that infamous training system which, let's be honest, was less Hogwarts and more Hunger Games. Starting at age 7, Spartan boys were tossed into a 13-year crash course in survival, discipline, and combat. This was no summer camp. It was a relentless grind that made Navy SEAL training look like a Zumba class. And while Hollywood loves to showcase the physical prowess of these warriors, it often glosses over the psychological toll. Imagine being moulded into a war machine with the emotional range of a teaspoon, not exactly your idyllic childhood. Now, on to the real meat of the Spartan legend, the Battle of Thermopylae. Ah, Thermopylae, the battlefield that launched 1,000 historical hot takes. The year was 480 BCE, and King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans made their legendary stand against the Persian Empire. But hold the popcorn, because this epic standoff wasn't a solo act. In reality, Leonidas's band of brothers was backed by a coalition of Greek allies, including about 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans. So, while the Spartans get top billing, they weren't exactly the lone action heroes of the day. The battle itself was a strategic, albeit desperate, move. The narrow pass at Thermopylae was chosen precisely because it nullified the Persian advantage of overwhelming numbers. Think of it as a tactical bottleneck, where the size of Xerxes' forces, estimated at anywhere from 100,000 to 150,000, was less of a game-changer. And for a while, it worked. The Greeks held the pass for 2 days, thanks to their superior armor and tactics. But on the 3rd day, a local named Ephialtes committed the ultimate betrayal by showing the Persians a secret path around the pass. The Spartans, now surrounded, fought to the last man. It was a heroic last stand, no doubt, but it was also a tactical failure. They managed to delay the Persians, but at the cost of their lives. And what about that Spartan invincibility? Spoiler alert, it's more myth than reality. Sure, they were fierce warriors, but they weren't infallible. For instance, let's talk about the Battle of Leuctra in 31 BCE, where the Theban army, led by Epaminondas, handed the Spartans a humiliating defeat. The Thebans employed an innovative tactic called the oblique phalanx, concentrating their forces on one side for a decisive punch. The result? Sparta's first major loss in centuries and a crack in the armor that would eventually lead to their decline. The Spartan military machine was impressive, but it had its limits. Their rigid focus on a singular form of warfare meant they were about as versatile as a one-trick pony. When facing a foe that didn't play by their rules, like the hit-and-run tactics of the Persian cavalry or the strategic innovations of the Thebans, they struggled. In fact, their obsession with maintaining a pure warrior class meant they were slow to adapt to new military technologies and strategies. This rigidity was a strength in battle, but a weakness on the grander stage of history. Economically, the Spartans lagged behind. While Athens thrived with its bustling economy and innovative spirit, Sparta clung to its austere lifestyle and militaristic ethos. This wasn't just a cultural choice, it was an economic necessity. The Spartans lacked the resources and infrastructure to support a large, complex economy, relying instead on the labor of the helots to keep the wheels turning. It's a bit like trying to win a race with a horse and buggy, while everyone else has moved on to sports cars. So, when you strip away the Hollywood sheen, what do you find? A society that was, in many ways, a victim of its own success. The Spartan system was designed to produce warriors of unparalleled discipline and bravery, but it came at the expense of adaptability and innovation. They were caught in a loop of their own making. one that emphasized stability over progress, military prowess over economic development. As we delve further into the Spartan saga, it's crucial to remember that their story is a cautionary tale, not just a celebration of martial excellence. The very qualities that made them formidable on the battlefield also sowed the seeds of their eventual decline. It's a reminder that even the mightiest warriors have their Achilles' heel, and that the legends we build often gloss over the inconvenient truths lurking in the shadows. So, as we continue to unravel the myth versus reality of Sparta, keep your wits about you, and remember, the past is never as simple as it seems. Now, as we pivot from the Spartan battlefield to the less glamorous but equally critical realm of their decline, let's talk about how the wheels fell off the Spartan chariot. The Battle of Leuctra in 3071 BCE wasn't just a bad day at the office for Sparta, it was the beginning of the end for their military dominance. With a Theban force led by Epaminondas exploiting the Spartans' rigid military tactics, Sparta's defeat was a seismic event, akin to watching your favorite superhero get knocked out cold by a rookie villain. The Spartan phalanx, once the gold standard of ancient warfare, was outmaneuvered by the Thebans' oblique order, a tactical innovation that left the Spartans scratching their helmeted heads. This wasn't just a battlefield loss, it was a shattering blow to their aura of invincibility, as devastating to their public image as a celebrity scandal plastered across ancient tabloids. But let's not let the glory of ancient battles blind us to the more mundane yet equally crucial factors that contributed to Sparta's downfall. Economically, Sparta was like a one-hit wonder band that forgot to diversify its repertoire. While Athens was busy minting coins and philosophizing about the meaning of life, Sparta was still counting sheep, literally. Their economy was heavily reliant on agriculture, with the helots doing the heavy lifting. This underdeveloped economic system was about as flexible as a steel beam, and when the winds of change came, Sparta found itself without a financial umbrella. Socially, things weren't looking much rosier. Sparta's rigid class system was as brittle as a stale cracker. The helots, who did all the grunt work, were treated like permanent underlings, and there was always simmering tension just waiting to boil over. Meanwhile, the Spartan citizenry, the so-called Spartiates, were a dwindling breed. With strict laws about citizenship and a lifestyle that prioritized dying in battle over, say, living to a ripe old age, the number of true Spartans was on a downward spiral. Not exactly a recipe for a thriving state. With these cracks in their societal and economic foundations, Sparta was about as adaptable as a rock. The world was moving on, experimenting with new forms of governance and economic models, but Sparta clung to its old ways like a toddler with a favorite blankie. The inability to change was like trying to run a marathon in flip-flops, doomed from the start. When the Thebans, and later the Macedonians under Philip II, came knocking, Sparta found itself woefully unprepared. Now, you might be wondering why, despite this catalogue of failures, the Spartan legend endures. Why do we still lionize a society that, in many ways, was a cautionary tale of rigidity and oppression? Maybe it's because the Spartan myth taps into something primal in us. A fascination with strength, discipline, and the allure of an ancient society that seemed to defy the odds. After all, who doesn't love a good underdog story, even if the underdog has a questionable past? In modern culture, Sparta is often romanticized as the pinnacle of military prowess and stoic simplicity. We see it in movies, books, and even motivational speeches that tout the Spartan way as a model of excellence. But like a polished social media profile, the reality is far more complex. The very traits that made Sparta formidable, its focus on military might, its strict social order, and its disdain for luxury, were also its Achilles' heel. It's a bit like admiring a beautifully built house without noticing it's perched on a crumbling foundation. What does the Spartan myth reveal about our own society's values and aspirations? For one, it highlights our enduring fascination with the idea of sacrifice and discipline. In an age where instant gratification is often the norm, the Spartan ethos of hard training and personal sacrifice resonates as a counter-narrative. Yet, it also serves as a poignant reminder that while discipline is admirable, inflexibility can be fatal. The Spartans might have had abs you could grate cheese on, but they lacked the adaptability that allows a society to thrive in changing times. So, what's the takeaway as we draw the curtains on our Spartan saga? It's that history is a mixed bag of triumphs and tragedies, of legends and lessons. The Spartans were warriors, yes, but they were also human, fallible, rigid, and ultimately outpaced by the tides of history. Their story is a mosaic of glory and folly, a tale that warns us against the dangers of placing too much stock in strength alone. As we ponder their legacy, let's keep in mind that even the most captivating myths are built on the foundations of reality, and that the true lessons of history often lie in its complexities, not its simplicities. In the end, Sparta's legacy is a paradox, an enduring tale of martial excellence overshadowed by an inability to evolve. It's a reminder that even the mightiest can fall, and that the real strength of a society lies not just in its ability to conquer, but in its capacity to adapt. So, as you drift off, let the Spartan story sink in. A tale of power, persistence, and the ultimate cost of standing still while the world moves forward. You hear the roosters call while the dawn is still yawning, and you know what that means? It's time to become a musketeer again. Now, if you think this involves leaping out of bed with a flourish like a scene from a swashbuckling film, hold your horses, or rather, your horse, singular, because even musketeers aren't made of money. The reality is, you're probably groaning a bit as you stretch those sore muscles. You might be in the prestigious ranks of the King's Musketeers, but that doesn't mean life is all duels and dashing escapades. Spoiler, you'll spend more time polishing boots than brandishing swords. First off, let's talk grooming. Forget the perfectly coiffed hair and shining armor. You start your day by splashing cold water on your face to shake off the grogginess, because coffee is still a luxury that hasn't quite become a morning staple. You take a rough brush to your hair, trying to tame it into something resembling order. Remember, you're in the age of Louis XV, a time when wigs were more a status symbol than a fashion choice. If you're aiming to look the part, a decent wig could cost you several livres, a minor fortune for a soldier whose pay isn't exactly lucrative. But hey, looking good comes at a price, right? With your hair situation sorted, or at least hidden under a hat, you turn to breakfast. Here's where things really get fancy. You might be expecting a lavish spread, but think again. Breakfast is likely a chunk of bread, maybe with a smear of jam if you're lucky, washed down with some thin ale. It's not exactly the croissant and café au lait combo we dream about today, but it keeps you going. Plus, it's cheap, and money is a constant worry. Your salary as a musketeer might be around 600 livres per year, which sounds decent until you realize that a good uniform alone can cost upwards of 100 livres, and we're not even talking about the cost of maintaining it. Try keeping those boots shiny and that coat pristine on a soldier's budget. Speaking of uniforms, let's dive into that. The musketeer's garb isn't just for show, it's your calling card, your armor, your identity. Dressing up involves layers, breeches, waistcoats, jackets, and the pièce de résistance, that iconic blue tabard with silver cross. This ensemble could take a good chunk of your morning to assemble, especially if you're aiming for that crisp, ready-for-inspection look. The whole process can feel like a juggling act, balancing between looking the part and not going broke in the process. Once you've wrangled yourself into your outfit, you turn to your gear. Those muskets aren't going to clean themselves. And here's a dirty little secret, muskets are notoriously finicky. The flintlock mechanism is a marvel of engineering for the time, but requires constant maintenance. You're looking at a good hour of cleaning and oiling just to ensure the thing will fire when you need it. And let's not forget the sword, your trusty companion that needs sharpening and polishing, lest it becomes a glorified paperweight. By the time you're done with all that, the sun is well and truly up, casting its golden light over the barracks. You might be thinking, wasn't this supposed to be glamorous? But here's the kicker. The real glamour is in the camaraderie, the shared gripes over morning routines, and the rare moments when all that preparation pays off in a flash of steel or a perfectly timed volley. So, as you strap on your sword and head out to face the day, remember this. Being a musketeer isn't just about the legend. It's about the grind, the hustle, the relentless quest to keep your boots polished and your musket in working order. Welcome to the real life of an 18th century French musketeer, where the dawn isn't just a beginning, it's a challenge accepted. And just when you think the hardest part of your morning is behind you, think again. Welcome to the musketeer's morning workout, where the real sweat begins. Forget your modern gym memberships and personal trainers. This is old-school, no-nonsense physical training designed to keep you in fighting shape. And trust me, It's not for the faint-hearted. First up, we've got the drills. You're out in the courtyard, the air still fresh with the scent of dew, and you're expected to move with the precision of a well-oiled machine. This isn't a casual jog in the park, it's a regimented routine, with each movement having a purpose. Think lunges, but with the added bonus of holding a musket above your head. Those things weigh around 10 pounds, or about 4.5 kilograms for our metric friends, so after a few reps, your arms start feeling like they're made of lead. Next on the agenda, the art of fencing. Now, this is where things get a bit theatrical. You might be envisioning elegant bouts with the ring of clashing steel echoing through the air. And while there is a certain grace to it, let's not romanticize it too much. Fencing is as much about endurance and strategy as it is about flair. You're learning to read your opponent, anticipate their moves, and strike with precision. It's like playing chess at high speed, with the added risk of getting poked if you miscalculate. But let's not get carried away with the glamour of swordplay. There's a reason why musketeers were famed for their skill with both blade and musket. Sure, you need the dexterity to handle a rapier, but you also need the grit to maintain your musket. Here's where the real drag comes in. Musket maintenance isn't just about cleaning. It's about understanding the anatomy of your weapon. Each part, from the barrel to the trigger, needs to be checked and double-checked. A misfire in battle isn't just embarrassing, it could be fatal. So, you spend a solid chunk of your morning ensuring your musket is as reliable as a Swiss watch, though probably not as pretty. Now, in between all this, you might catch a glimpse of the social hierarchy at play. The Musketeers were the king's elite guards, but let's not kid ourselves. Not all men were created equal. Rank and favour could be as elusive as a fox in a hunt. To climb the social ladder, you needed connections, and connections often meant money. It's the age-old story. The richer your family, the better your chances of advancement. If you're from a modest background, you're probably working twice as hard to get half as far. And speaking of money, let's talk economics. You might be earning around 600 livres a year, but with the cost of living, it feels like you're trying to hold water in a sieve. A good sword could set you back 20 livres, and let's not even mention the cost of repairs. Every rip in your uniform is a little reminder of how quickly expenses add up. It's a delicate balance, maintaining your status without emptying your purse. All this, and it's not even lunchtime. You're not just battling physical exhaustion. You're wrestling with the constant pressure of social expectations and financial strain. But hey, at least you've got camaraderie. Trading jibes with your fellow musketeers, sharing stories of past skirmishes or griping about the latest orders. It's the glue that holds the regiment together. After all, when you're facing the daily grind of musketeer life, a shared laugh can be as refreshing as a cold drink on a hot day. So, as you sheath your sword and prepare for whatever the day throws at you next, remember, the life of a musketeer might sparkle with the sheen of legend, but beneath that gleam lies grit, hard work, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Keep your wits sharp, your sword sharper, and your musket in prime condition. The day is young, and so are you. At least until the next set of drills. Ah, the life of the musketeer. It's a tapestry woven with threads of glory and grit, and as you sheath your sword, the day is only just beginning. If the morning was about sweat and discipline, midday is where things get politically spicy. Welcome to the realm of court duties and field maneuvers, where every action is a calculated move in the grand chess game of power and politics. Let's set the stage. It's the heyday of Louis XIV, and the French court is a spectacle of opulence and intrigue. As a musketeer, you're not just a soldier, you're a cog in the great machine of statecraft. Your midday duties might involve standing guard at the Palace of Versailles, a place so lavish that even the toilets were gilded. Yes, you heard that right, gilded toilets. Excess, perhaps, but it's all part of the show, and you're front and center. Now, if you're imagining yourself as a dashing hero thwarting an assassin's plot amidst the halls of Versailles, slow down. The reality is closer to being a very fancy, very armed doorman. Your job is to protect the king and his court, but also to be seen. It's a performance, really, a demonstration of power, discipline, and loyalty. And let's be honest, there's a certain satisfaction in the showmanship, even if it's all about standing still and looking intimidating. But don't get too comfortable. The political arena is as treacherous as any battlefield. Take the affair of the poison scandal in the 1670s and 1680s, a sordid tale of poison, witchcraft, and conspiracy involving the upper echelons of French society. Musketeers were often involved in such investigations, not as swashbuckling detectives, but as enforcers of the king's justice. It's less Sherlock Holmes and more knocking on doors and making arrests. Glorious? Not quite. Necessary? Absolutely. And when you're not at the court, you might find yourself in the field. Here's where the romanticized image of the musketeer charging valiantly into battle needs a reality check. Sure, there are moments of heroism, but there's also the drudgery of camp life. Picture this. You're stationed near a muddy riverbank, your tent barely holding up against the elements, and your primary task is not to fight, but to wait. For orders, for supplies, for the enemy to make a move. Waiting becomes an art form. While in the field, you could be tasked with reconnaissance, which isn't as glamorous as it sounds. It's less about galloping through the countryside and more about tramping through mud, keeping your eyes peeled for enemy movements or supply lines. The landscape is your adversary as much as any opposing soldier. A muddy road could delay a supply train by days, and suddenly your biggest battle isn't against enemy musketeers, but against hunger and morale. And let's talk about logistics. In the 18th century, a military campaign was as much about supply lines as it was about strategic brilliance. Armies moved at the pace of their provisions, and as a musketeer, you're part of that machine. Your daily rations might include bread, cheese, and wine, the latter often safer to drink than water. But when supplies run low, you learn to make do. Scavenging becomes a survival skill, and you'd be amazed at how inventive soldiers can get when faced with an empty stomach. Back to the court. If you're lucky or well-connected, you might attend the king's levee, the royal morning reception where nobles jockey for favour and influence. It's a social dance, and you're there to ensure it goes off without a hitch. Observe the pecking order. Learn who's in and who's out, but most importantly, don't get too involved. The court is a den of vipers, and one false step can lead to a fall from grace faster than you can say, let them eat cake. The court is also a place where myths about musketeers flourish. Thanks to Alexandre Dumas and his swashbuckling tales, musketeers are often seen as romantic heroes. But let's be real, for every noble act of valour, there are countless hours spent on dull, bureaucratic tasks. Think of the paperwork. Yes, even musketeers have to deal with it. Reports, requisitions, orders, it's all part of the job. And while you might dream of being the hero who saves the day, more often than not, you're the guy who makes sure the right people sign off on the right forms. Yet, amidst these mundane duties, there is a certain allure to the life of a musketeer. The camaraderie, the sense of belonging to something greater than oneself, and the thrill of wearing that iconic blue tabard. These are the things that make it worthwhile. The legend is appealing, sure, but it's the reality that gives it depth. And as you navigate the labyrinth of court politics and military maneuvers, you realize that being a musketeer is as much about survival as it is about honor. So, as you stand sentinel at the court or trudge through the fields on patrol, remember this: the life of a musketeer is a balancing act between myth and reality, between duty and desire. It's not always glamorous, but it's never dull. And while the legend might sparkle like the gilded halls of Versailles, it's the grit beneath that gives it substance. Keep your eyes sharp, your wits sharper, and remember that in this world of intrigue and ambition, the true heroes are those who master both the sword and the pen. The day isn't over yet, and the world of the musketeers has many more stories to tell. As the afternoon sun begins its lazy descent, casting long shadows across the cobblestones of Versailles, you're reminded that the life of a musketeer is a relentless carousel of duties. Gone are the morning's drills and the political tango at court. Now it's time to hit the streets. You're about to embark on one of the more visible aspects of your job, the patrol. This is where you swap the grandeur of the palace for the grit of Parisian alleys, and trust me, the latter is no less challenging. Patrols are the bread and butter of musketeer life. They serve to enforce the king's peace, a task that sounds noble until you realize it involves a lot of footwork and a fair bit of diplomacy, or as much diplomacy as you can muster with a musket on your shoulder. You're patrolling a city that's very much alive, teeming with merchants, beggars, nobles, and thieves. It's a city of contrasts where wealth rubs shoulders with poverty, and order is just a hair's breadth from chaos. Now, don't be fooled by the romantic imagery of musketeers charging gallantly through the streets, capes billowing dramatically. The reality is less about heroics and more about vigilance. Your afternoon patrol covers several kilometers, and while you're on the beat, you're looking out for pickpockets, quelling brawls, and occasionally breaking up an illegal duel. Yes, dueling is technically banned, but try telling that to a hot-headed noble with a score to settle. While you're keeping the peace, let's take a moment to debunk the myth of the musketeers' combat prowess. Popular culture would have you believe that musketeers are unmatched swordsmen, capable of taking down a dozen foes without breaking a sweat. In reality, musketeers were trained to be jacks of all trades. Sure, they could handle a sword with finesse, but they were equally skilled with muskets and pistols. And let's face it, a well-aimed musket ball is a great equalizer when the odds aren't in your favor. The truth is, combat was as much about strategy and discipline as it was about skill. A musketeer's training emphasized coordination and teamwork over individual glory. In those tense moments of a skirmish, it wasn't the flashy swordplay that won the day, it was the ability to hold the line, to reload under pressure, and to follow orders in the heat of battle. If you've ever tried reloading a musket while someone's aiming a pistol at you, you'll appreciate the level of calm required. And speaking of skirmishes, they're not the daily occurrence you might imagine from the stories. Sure, there are occasional brushes with bandits or skirmishes with rival factions, but these moments are interspersed with long stretches of sheer routine. It's the quiet before the storm, the lull that makes every sound sharper and every shadow longer. You're always on edge, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice, but also hoping that the day passes without incident. Because let's be real, while tales of daring battles make for great stories, most days, you're quite happy if all you have to do is get through your patrol without drawing your sword. Evening approaches, and your patrol winds down as the city begins to glow with the light of 1,000 candles. But don't get too comfortable. There's always a chance that your day isn't quite over. The musketeers were the king's go-to enforcers, and when the king needed something done, it was often the musketeers who got the call. Whether it's delivering urgent messages, escorting dignitaries, or cracking down on illegal activities in the city, you're never truly off duty. And while we're on the subject of duty, let's talk about the less glamorous aspects. The life of a musketeer involves a fair share of drudgery. Think guard duty, but with more mud and fewer creature comforts. When not patrolling the city, you might find yourself stationed at a remote outpost, enduring the elements while keeping a watchful eye on the horizon. It's a test of endurance, and not just physically. The isolation can get to you, and it's here that the camaraderie among musketeers becomes your lifeline. A shared joke, a song, or even a gripe about the weather can be enough to lift your spirits and remind you that you're not alone in this. As you're standing there, with the weight of duty on your shoulders and the evening chill in the air, you can't help but reflect on why you chose this life. The pay isn't great, the work is hard, and the risks are real. Yet, there's a sense of pride in wearing that uniform, in being part of a legacy that stretches back to the days of Louis XIII. It's a life of service, of honor, and for all its challenges, it's one you wouldn't trade for anything. So, as the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, you steel yourself for whatever the night might bring. Because at the end of the day, being a musketeer isn't about the glory, it's about the grit, the grind, and the unyielding commitment to king and country. It's a life lived on the edge of legend, where every patrolled street and every guarded door is a stitch in the fabric of history. The legend will continue to unfold. The night is young, and so are you, at least until the next patrol. As the clock edges closer to evening, a musketeer's thoughts naturally drift to the promise of a warm meal and the company of comrades. After a day of patrolling the lively, and sometimes lawless streets of Paris, the barracks call like a siren song. Don't get your hopes up for some grand feast, though. Dinner is more likely a simple soup or stew, paired with the ever-reliable bread and perhaps a bit of cheese if fortune smiles upon you. And let's not forget the wine, never in short supply, though its quality could range from passable to something akin to vinegar. You don't drink it for the taste, you drink it because, unlike the water, it won't give you dysentery. In these moments, as you gather around the communal table, the real essence of musketeer life comes out, not the sword fights or the grand gestures, but the camaraderie. It's in the shared laughs, the stories of the day's adventures, and the camaraderie that binds you like the threads of a tapestry. These are your brothers in arms, And in a world where life can be as unpredictable as the Paris weather, that bond is invaluable. Here, rank takes a backseat to friendship, and a green recruit can share a joke with a seasoned veteran. Yet, behind the smiles and camaraderie lie personal struggles that each musketeer faces. The romanticized tales of musketeers often gloss over the harsh realities of their lives. Many are far from home, drawn to the core by the promise of steady pay and the allure of serving the king. But at 600 livres a year, financial stability is a distant dream. Debts mount, and the cost of maintaining one's equipment and appearance can lead to a precarious balancing act. Loans from fellow soldiers or local merchants are common, creating a cycle of borrowing that's as hard to escape as quicksand. The personal lives of musketeers are equally fraught. Many are married to their duty, leaving little room for family life. Those with families often struggle to provide, sending most of their pay back home. It's a life of sacrifice, where personal desires are often subservient to the demands of service. Yet, amidst this, there's a sense of pride and purpose. They know they are part of something larger than themselves, a legacy that began with the formation of the Musketeers in 1622 under Louis XIII. As the evening meal winds down, thoughts turn to the next day. Equipment is checked and cleaned, uniforms patched, and plans made for tomorrow's challenges. It's a cycle as old as the regiment itself. But in these quiet moments of reflection, there's also a chance to consider the legacy they're building. Every day, they write a new chapter in the ongoing story of the Musketeers. When we think of Musketeers today, we're often swept away by the romantic images popularized by Alexandre Dumas' novels, dashing heroes leaping into action with cries of "all for one and one for all." But Dumas played fast and loose with facts, crafting legends that bore only a passing resemblance to the real lives of these soldiers. His musketeers were swashbuckling adventurers, but the truth was far more grounded. The real musketeers were disciplined soldiers, expert marksmen, and dedicated servants of the king, far removed from the maverick heroes of fiction. Yet the appeal of the legend endures, capturing imaginations long after the regiment was disbanded in 1776. Why? Perhaps it's because the stories of musketeers tap into universal themes, courage, loyalty, brotherhood that resonate with us all. They remind us of the ideals we aspire to, even when reality falls short. The musketeers' true legacy isn't just in their military achievements or their service to the crown, but in the values they embodied, imperfectly as they may have lived them. As the last embers of the fire flicker in the hearth, you realize that being a musketeer was about finding honor in the everyday, heroism in the humdrum. It's about the grit beneath the glamour and the reality beneath the romance. These men lived on the edge of legend, etching their stories into the annals of history with every polished boot and every drawn sword. So, as you settle down for the night, ready to rise again with the dawn, you carry with you the weight of history and the promise of tomorrow. Because in the end, the life of a musketeer is more than just a job. It's a calling, a commitment to a legacy that transcends time. Sleep well, for when the sun rises, it'll be time to step back into history, to live the legend anew, one day at a time. The land of Egypt, drenched in sunlight and sand, had a knack for producing rulers with egos as big as their pyramids. Enter Ramses II, the pharaoh who would eventually be known as Ramses the Great. But before he was busy carving his name into every available stone surface, Ramses was just a kid from a family that could give the Lannisters a run for their money. Born around 3003 BCE, Ramses was thrust into a world where the stakes were as high as the temperature. His dad, Seti I, was the pharaoh, a title that, in those days, was a mix between a divine right and a really aggressive PR campaign. Seti. I was no slouch when it came to ensuring his legacy. He was the kind of guy who thought ahead, not just in terms of building a massive tomb, but also by securing his dynasty through marriage alliances that would make a political strategist salivate. You see, ancient Egyptian politics were a bit like a game of chess, only with more sand and fewer horses. Marriages were strategic moves to consolidate power, peace treaties were written in stone, literally, and heirs were as valuable as gold statues of the gods. Seti married a woman named Tuya, who came from a family with enough clout to bolster his own claims to the throne. Together they set the stage for Ramses's rise. Now, in the 13th century BCE, Egypt wasn't just chilling by the Nile, sipping on pomegranate juice. It was a powerhouse, a superpower of the ancient world. But with great power came even greater enemies. The Hittites to the north, the Nubians to the south, and a whole host of other neighbors were eager to test Egypt's limits. Seti's job wasn't just to build monuments, he had to keep an empire intact. This was the high-stakes environment Ramses grew up in, where political intrigue was as common as sandstorms. Growing up, Ramses and his siblings were part of a royal family dynamic that would make a modern-day therapist's dreams come true. Sibling rivalry was practically a sport. Ramses had multiple brothers and sisters, each with their own ambitions and parental expectations. But Ramses had an edge, his father's unwavering determination to groom him as the heir. It's said that Seti took Ramses on military campaigns from a young age, teaching him the art of war and the importance of looking regal while doing it. Talk about an intense summer internship. But let's not sugarcoat it. Ramses's claim to the throne wasn't just about being daddy's favorite. It was a calculated move to ensure a smooth transition of power, something ancient Egypt had struggled with in the past. Pharaohs who failed to secure their succession risked chaos, and chaos was bad for business. So Seti made sure Ramses was not only trained as a soldier, but also educated in statecraft and religion. By the time Ramses was crowned co-ruler at the age of 14, he was already well versed in the fine art of pharaohing. Of course, the legitimacy of Ramses's royal lineage wasn't without its question marks. Some whispers in the royal court might have suggested that Seti's claim to the throne was bolstered by his marriage to Tuya, whose family connections were as deep-rooted as a papyrus reed. But whether or not Ramses's blood was bluer than the Nile wasn't really the point. The real power came from his father's ability to maneuver through the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined the political landscape of the time. What made Ramses stand out wasn't just his royal pedigree or his father's strategic genius, it was his charisma and his knack for self-promotion. Even as a young prince, Ramses had a flair for the dramatic. He understood that in an era where the gods were as real as the pharaohs themselves, image was everything, and he had an image that was larger than life, literally. By the time he was old enough to sit on the throne alone, he was already a legend in the making. So, Ramses entered the scene as a teenage co-regent riding on the coattails of his father's accomplishments, but with a clear intent to carve out his own legacy. He inherited a kingdom that was both a blessing and a burden. On the one hand, he had a well-established empire, a well-oiled machine of bureaucracy and military might. On the other hand, he had a family history of intrigue and ambition that could implode at any moment if not carefully managed. The early years of Ramses's life were a masterclass in ancient political maneuvering, with a dash of sibling rivalry and the ever-present threat of external enemies. In this soap opera of sandstone and scepters, Ramses was already showing signs of the greatness and the hubris that would define his reign. Ramses was already a legend in the making, but what really cemented his status as a larger-than-life figure was his military career, or at least the story he spun about it. And nowhere is this storytelling prowess more evident than in the epic tale of the Battle of Kadesh. Let's roll back to 174 BCE, where Ramses decided it was high time to tackle the Hittites, those pesky neighbors to the north who had a habit of poking at Egypt's borders. The stage was set for what was supposed to be a grand showdown, but spoiler alert, it was neither grand nor much of a showdown. Ramses marched his army up to Kadesh with a swagger that could only come from a man who had already written his victory speech. He divided his army into 4 divisions, each named after an Egyptian god, Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set. You could almost hear the ancient equivalent of a drum roll as the troops advanced. But Ramses, ever the master of suspense, didn't bother with a rehearsal. He'd soon find out that his intel was as reliable as a papyrus fortune cookie. The Hittites, led by Muwatalli II, were not 2 days away as Ramses believed, but lurking much closer, ready to pounce. Cue the chaos. The Hittites launched a surprise attack on Ramses's camp, and the Egyptian divisions scattered like scarabs. Ramses found himself isolated with only his bodyguard, a situation less epic victory and more epic oops. But here's where Ramses's flair for the dramatic kicked in. He allegedly fought off the attackers single-handedly, a tale that sounds suspiciously like something you'd hear around a campfire after a few too many amphorae of wine. In reality, it was the timely arrival of the Naarin, mercenaries from Amuru, that turned the tide and saved Ramses from becoming a footnote in history. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Ramses, realizing he couldn't claim a clear-cut victory, did the next best thing. He invented one. He returned to Egypt and unleashed a propaganda campaign that would make modern spin doctors weep with envy. Temples across Egypt were adorned with carvings depicting Ramses as a godlike figure, smiting the Hittites with the wrath of 1,000 suns. The narrative was simple. Ramses, the divine hero, had single-handedly defeated an entire army. Never mind the inconvenient truths, like the fact that the battle ended in a stalemate. What mattered was the story, and Ramses knew how to tell a good one. Economic context time. Wars are expensive, and Ramses's military campaigns were no exception. The Battle of Kadesh alone would have cost a small fortune, draining Egypt's coffers like a leaky sieve. But Ramses understood that the real currency of power was perception. By portraying himself as a victorious warrior king, he maintained the domestic stability necessary to keep those grain shipments flowing and trade routes humming. In a world where the divine right of kings was a literal belief, convincing the populace of his godlike prowess was as valuable as gold. But here's the kicker. Ramses and Muwatalli eventually realized that constant skirmishes were bad for business. A few years after Kadesh, they agreed to a peace treaty, one of the first recorded in history. It was written on a silver tablet because if you're going to make peace, you might as well make it fancy. This treaty didn't just end hostilities. It established a new era of diplomacy between the two powers, with terms that included mutual support against rebellion and extradition agreements. It was, in many ways, the ancient equivalent of, "You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours." The myth of Ramses's victory at Kadesh is a classic case of history being written by the victors, or at least those who can carve it into temple walls. Ramses's brilliant spin job ensured that he wasn't just remembered as a warrior, but as a god among men, a ruler whose legend would endure for millennia. Yet, behind the grandeur of his self-imposed legend, was a ruler who understood the realpolitik of his time. He knew that sustaining an empire was about as much about perception as it was about military might. In the end, the Battle of Kadesh was less about winning a war and more about winning the narrative. So, while Ramses may not have emerged from Kadesh with a definitive military triumph, he walked away with something arguably more valuable, a legacy crafted with the precision of a master sculptor. And in the Game of Thrones, Ancient Egyptian edition, that was worth its weight in gold and then some. Stay tuned, because this Pharaoh story is far from over. There are more temples to build, more gods to appease, and yes, more myths to create. Ramses's story was still being chiseled into the annals of history, and what better way to immortalize oneself than with a lot of stonework? It turns out Ramses wasn't just content with spinning tales of military might. No, he needed monuments that would make future tourists drop their jaws faster than a sun-baked falafel. Enter Ramses's monumental building spree, a veritable explosion of limestone and granite projects that would have made any ancient architect weep with both envy and exhaustion. Let's start with Abu Simbel, shall we? If you ever find yourself cruising down the Nile, or more realistically, looking at pictures online, those gigantic statues of Ramses seated like a divine colossus are hard to miss. Carved directly into a sandstone cliff, these statues were Ramses's way of saying, "I'm a big deal, and don't you forget it." The temple complex was dedicated to the gods, Amun, Ra-Harakti, and Ptah, but let's not kid ourselves, this was Ramses's vanity project, with his likeness adorning the entrance like a royal selfie on steroids. Now, the logistics of building such a colossal monument were nothing short of Herculean. We're talking about moving stone blocks that weighed upwards of 20 tons each. That's about the weight of 5 African elephants, for those keeping score at home. Without the luxury of cranes or modern machinery, how did they do it? The answer, a small army of labourers, peaking at thousands, armed with ropes, wooden sledges, and sheer determination. And let's not forget the strategically placed ramps and a whole lot of elbow grease. It's estimated that it took around 20 years to complete Abu Simbel, a testament to both Ramses's ambition and his patience, or perhaps his ability to delegate. Of course, Abu Simbel wasn't the only feather in Ramses's construction cap. The Karnak temple complex, a sprawling testament to Egyptian religious devotion and architectural prowess, received its own set of upgrades courtesy of Ramses. He added the hypo-style hall, a forest of towering columns that would give any Pinterest board a run for its money. Each column was inscribed with hieroglyphs depicting Ramses's many, and often exaggerated, accomplishments. Because what's the point of building something if you can't brag about it for eternity? But all this stone moving and column raising wasn't just about aesthetics or ego. There was a political and economic calculus at play. Monumental architecture was a way to legitimize power, to show both the gods and the people that the pharaoh was a divine ruler, blessed by the heavens and capable of moving mountains, or at least moving stones that looked like mountains. Each temple served as a religious, economic, and sometimes even military hub. They were places of worship, yes, but also centers for trade and administration. The temples employed thousands, from priests to laborers, creating a microeconomy that helped stabilize Ramses's rule. And speaking of the economy, let's talk about the financial gymnastics behind these grand projects. Ramses's building spree was the ancient equivalent of a government stimulus package on steroids. The sheer scale of these constructions required vast resources: stone from quarries, timber for scaffolding, food to feed the workforce, and the all-important gold and silver to keep the wheels of commerce greased. It was a massive investment, one that likely strained the royal treasury to its limits. Yet the benefits were substantial. These projects provided jobs and stimulated trade both domestically and with neighboring regions. They helped consolidate Ramses's power by reinforcing his image as a god-king while simultaneously boosting Egypt's status as a cultural and economic powerhouse. However, with great building comes great responsibility, or at least great financial risk. Ramses's ambitious projects might have kept the economy humming, but they also made him walk the tightrope of fiscal management. The costs were staggering, and while ancient Egypt was wealthy, its resources weren't infinite. Imagine trying to balance the books when your biggest expense is a 69-foot-tall statue of yourself. It's enough to make any modern-day accountant break into a cold sweat. But Ramses was nothing if not resourceful. He knew that maintaining an empire was about more than just swords and soldiers. It was about creating a legacy that would endure long after the battles were fought. His temples and statues were more than mere stone. They were political statements, carved in perpetuity, meant to remind everyone, everywhere, that Ramses was indeed the Great. They were the ancient equivalent of a permanent campaign poster, promising prosperity, stability, and divine favor. Of course, the romantic notion of Ramses as a benevolent builder has its darker undertones. The labor force that erected these monumental structures wasn't composed of well-paid artisans living in luxury. Many of the laborers were likely conscripted workers, including prisoners of war and slaves, toiling under the relentless Egyptian sun. The work was backbreaking and dangerous, a testament to human endurance and, occasionally, human exploitation. Yet, in the grand narrative spun by Ramses, these details were conveniently glossed over, replaced by tales of divine inspiration and pharaonic glory. In the end, Ramses's construction frenzy wasn't just a series of architectural feats, it was a masterclass in ancient public relations. By leaving behind a legacy of stone, Ramses ensured that his name would echo through the ages, etched into the consciousness of every historian, archaeologist, and curious onlooker who dared to ask, who was Ramses II? His monuments were more than mere structures, they were declarations of an indelible presence, a reminder that in the vast sands of time Ramses had carved out a kingdom of stone. So, while the logistics of moving giant blocks without cranes might seem like an engineering nightmare, for Ramses it was all part of the grand design. He wasn't just building temples and statues, he was building an empire, one limestone slab at a time. And although his methods might invite criticism from the modern-day fiscally conservative, there's no denying that Ramses understood the power of a good story and a great monument. As the sun set over the Nile, casting shadows over his colossal creations, Ramses's legacy was already set in stone, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows over Ramses's monument-studded empire, the pharaoh himself was busy plotting his next move, not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. You see, Ramses wasn't just a master builder and a self-proclaimed war hero, he was also a diplomatic virtuoso. And he had a particular ace up his sleeve that would reshape the ancient geopolitical landscape, the world's first recorded peace treaty with the Hittites. Now, before you start imagining a bunch of toga-clad diplomats sipping wine and swapping olive branch emojis, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of this ancient accord. The Treaty of Kadesh, as it came to be known, was inked in 1258 BCE, approximately 15 years after Ramses's not-so-decisive victory at Kadesh. This wasn't just any old parchment, it was a silver tablet, because what better way to show you're serious about peace than with a little bling? The treaty was an impressive piece of diplomacy, essentially declaring, let's not do anything rash, like invading each other, okay? It outlined terms for mutual defense, extradition of fugitives, a sort of ancient, no more hiding behind your pyramids agreement, and non-aggression pacts. Ramses and the Hittite king, Hattusili III, weren't exactly besties, but they both realized that constant warfare was as productive as trying to irrigate the Sahara. This accord was more than just a ceasefire. It was a strategic move to stabilize their respective realms and keep the trade routes open. Speaking of strategy, Ramses's diplomatic acumen extended well beyond treaties. He knew that alliances weren't just forged on the battlefield or in the halls of diplomacy. Sometimes they were made at the altar. Enter Ramses's political marriages, a series of unions that were less about love stories and more about sticky webs of alliance and intrigue. In a world where keeping your friends close and your enemies closer was less a cliché and more a survival tactic, these marriages were Ramses's way of playing 4D chess. Ramses married multiple queens, with his most famous union being with Nefertari, whose tomb in the Valley of the Queens is a testament to her significance. But beyond the romance of hieroglyphs and painted sarcophagi, there were marriages that served clear political purposes. His marriage to a Hittite princess, for instance, was a masterstroke in diplomacy, a way to literally seal the peace treaty with a kiss. The princess arrived in Egypt with a dowry that could make a pharaoh's tax collector swoon, and Ramses got to show the world that he could turn enemies into family. These alliances were Ramses's insurance policy, binding potential adversaries so tightly that they'd think twice before going rogue. It's as if Ramses was saying, I'm not just your neighbor, I'm your in-law too. So maybe let's not set each other's front yards on fire. This web of marriages wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about keeping Ramses's empire ticking over smoothly with fewer surprises than an Egyptian summer. But while Ramses was busy tying the diplomatic knot, he was also building something else, a personality cult that would make any modern influencer green with envy. Ramses was the ancient world's original brand ambassador, and his brand was Ramses, the living god. His likeness was everywhere, on statues, temples, and even the odd grain silo, just in case you forgot who was boss while grabbing your daily bread. Ramses's image was crafted with the precision of a master sculptor and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Consider the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple on the west bank of the Nile. This wasn't just a place to honor the gods or prepare for the afterlife. No, it was a monument to Ramses himself, a sprawling tribute to his might and divine favor. It was also a clever piece of propaganda, reinforcing his image as a god-king and ensuring that even in death he was larger than life. This personality cult was about more than just feeding Ramses's ego. It was a political tool. The pharaoh was seen as the earthly embodiment of the divine, a physical link between the gods and the people. By portraying himself as a god-king, Ramses solidified his rule and quelled potential dissent. After all, it's hard to revolt against someone who claims to have the backing of the entire pantheon. Yet, behind the grandeur and the grandeur-induced vertigo, there were darker undertones. The laborers who toiled under the blistering sun to carve Ramses' legacy into stone were often prisoners, slaves, or conscripted workers. Their sweat and suffering were the mortar that held his monuments together. This wasn't the romanticized story of noble artisans crafting their pharaoh's dream. It was a harsh reality where human endurance was pushed to its limits. In the end, Ramses's reign wasn't just a tale of military might or architectural wonders. It was a complex dance of politics, diplomacy, and propaganda. He understood that power wasn't just about armies or treaties, it was about perception. By controlling the narrative, Ramses carved out a legacy that would endure for millennia. So, while you might marvel at the towering statues and the intricately carved hieroglyphs, remember the real story behind them: a ruler who played the Game of Thrones like a master, with a penchant for drama and a toolkit full of stone chisels. Stay tuned, because Ramses' saga is far from over. There are more alliances to forge, more myths to spin, and more temples to build. In the world of sandstone and scepters, Ramses' story is just heating up, and so the saga of Ramses II, a tale as ancient as the Sphinx and twice as enigmatic, marches on toward its inevitable close. Let's pause and take a panoramic view of his legacy, both the grandeur and the grit, a pharaoh who was part god, part statesman, and perhaps a touch of showman. Ramses' legacy, like his monuments, is built on layers. At the top, we have the polished myth of Ramses the Great. Here's a guy who could sell sand in the Sahara, convincing his contemporaries and generations beyond that he personally held the sun in the sky. His larger-than-life persona was crafted with the same precision as his colossal statues. And yet, beneath this gilded surface lies the reality of a ruler navigating the complicated web of human politics and ambition. Historians often argue about the exact nature of Ramses' greatness, and here's why. The pharaoh's reign was both a high watermark of Egyptian cultural achievement and a study in imperial overreach. He ruled for an astonishing 66 years, dying in 1213 BCE at the ripe old age of about 90. During his tenure, he fathered more than 100 children, ensuring his bloodline was about as extensive as a Nile flood. But let's not confuse quantity with quality. A crowded nursery doesn't necessarily mean a stable succession. Ramses's longevity was a double-edged khopesh. On one hand, it provided continuity and stability, allowing Egypt to bask in the glow of his enduring rule. On the other, it meant that many of his heirs predeceased him, leaving a succession crisis that would unravel after his death quicker than a mummy's bandages. When Ramses finally shuffled off this mortal coil, Egypt found itself with a leadership void that even his monumental ego couldn't fill posthumously. The economic footprint of Ramses's reign was equally monumental. His building projects and military campaigns were costly affairs, requiring substantial wealth that Egypt, with its gold mines and grain surpluses, could just about support. However, the economic strain of maintaining such a sprawling empire was palpable. Ramses's successors found themselves inheriting not just an empire, but the fiscal hangover that came with it. Think of it as the world's oldest case of paying the piper. Politically, Ramses's adept use of diplomacy and marriage alliances had kept the peace during his lifetime, but these alliances were as ephemeral as the desert breeze. Once he was gone, those carefully spun webs of political marriages began to fray, unraveling Egypt's influence in the region. The peace with the Hittites, secured by that silver tablet, was only as shiny as the personalities that forged it. With Ramses gone, maintaining those bonds was like trying to carry water in a reed basket. And then there are the temples, those magnificent edifices that have outlasted the sands of time. They're both a testament to Ramses's architectural ambition and a stark reminder of the human cost that built them. Scholars still debate whether these grand structures serve more as religious centers or as manifestations of Ramses's colossal ego. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, a pharaoh needing to display divine favor while indulging his personal penchant for monumental self-promotion. But let's not overlook the generational impact of Ramses' reign. His prolific offspring meant that his family tree was more of a dense thicket, with branches extending into every corner of Egyptian governance. This dynastic reach ensured that Ramses's lineage remained influential long after his death, even if his direct successors struggled to maintain the same level of centralized control. Ramses's enduring influence is also palpable in the Egyptian psyche, where he became a touchstone of pharaonic power. Later rulers, seeking to bolster their legitimacy, often invoked Ramses's memory, even adopting his name, to bask in the reflected glory of his reign. It's a classic case of brand recognition in the ancient world, Ramses II, the original influencer. And yet, for all his accomplishments, Ramses's legacy is not without its warts. His reign saw the apex of Egypt's imperial power, but also sowed the seeds of its eventual decline. The very ambitions that drove his monumental achievements also laid the groundwork for the stresses and strains that his successors would inherit. The empire he left behind was a testament to his vision, but also a cautionary tale about the perils of overreach. In the end, Ramses II remains a fascinating enigma, part man. His story is a reminder that history, much like the Nile, is a river of stories, winding its way through the sands of time, carrying with it the dreams and delusions of those who dared to carve their names into its banks. Ramses's legacy is etched in stone, but the truth of his life is as mutable as the shifting sands that surround his monuments. So as the sun sets on our exploration of Ramses's life, remember that greatness is often a matter of perspective, a blend of myth and reality, ambition and consequence. Ramses II was indeed great, but perhaps not for the reasons he would have us believe. His legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of glory and hubris, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and the human desire to be remembered. The rooster's crow serves as your alarm clock, not the gentle melodic type, but the kind that jolts you awake with the subtlety of a jousting lance. Welcome to your life as an artisan in 8th century Wessex, where the concept of a snooze button is as foreign as the far-off Constantinople traders you've only heard tales of. As you shake off the last remnants of sleep, take a moment to appreciate the fact that you're part of a small but vital cog in this medieval economy. You're not just making trinkets, you're crafting the very backbone of local commerce. Now, before you get lost in romantic visions of an idyllic village life, let's clear the mist. The air might be crisp and the morning dew picturesque, but the reality is as gritty as the iron tools you craft. This is not some pastoral paradise where everyone spends their days frolicking in flower-filled meadows. No, you're in a world where each day is a grindstone, and your hands are the wheels that keep it turning. In your little corner of Wessex, currency isn't just a jingling reminder of wealth, it's more of a scarce resource. The silver penny is king, ruling over your economic life with a tight fist. One of these little coins, weighing just 1.5 grams, is enough to buy you a sheep or a bushel of grain. But don't let that fool you into thinking you're living large. Most folks, including you, won't see many of these in a year. You're more likely to barter your goods, swapping a finely crafted brooch for a slab of salted pork or a few eggs. You make your way to your workshop, a modest affair with wooden walls and a thatched roof where the tools of your trade await. The chisel, the hammer, the anvil. These are your companions, more reliable than a politician's promise. Your workbench is cluttered with bits of copper, tin, and iron, each piece holding the potential for transformation into something both functional and beautiful. The morning light filters through cracks in the wall, casting stripes of illumination across your workbench. You start with a brooch, the intricate patterns swirling under your skilled hands. Each twist of metal is not just a flourish, it's a testament to your craftsmanship and a reminder that artisans like you are the unsung heroes of this era. Without your skills, the nobility would be left pinning their cloaks with sticks and stones. But don't get too carried away with the poetry of it all. Your role is firmly planted within the social hierarchy that's as rigid as a cathedral column. At the top you've got the king and his noble entourage, lording over everyone with lands and titles. Then come the thegns, the warrior class who strut about with their swords and shields. And somewhere near the bottom, that's you, the artisan, respected for your skill but still very much a commoner. You pause to stretch your aching back and consider the broader world in which you live. Trade networks crisscross the land like the veins in your hands, connecting Wessex to far-off realms. The goods you create might end up in Mercia or even Kent, carried by merchants who navigate the hazardous roads and waterways. It's a dangerous gig, braving the elements and the ever-present threat of banditry. But it's the lifeline that keeps your community afloat. As you work, it's easy to see how the life of an artisan in Saxon England gets romanticized. The notion of being a self-made master of your craft has a certain allure, but let's not ignore the calluses and sweat that come with it. This isn't a life of leisurely creativity. It's one of constant labor, fueled by the relentless need to trade goods to fill bellies and pay taxes. Speaking of taxes, let's not forget about the king's ceaseless appetite for revenue. You're obligated to contribute your share, whether in coin, goods, or service. No one escapes the king's reach, not even the artisans who toil away in their workshops. It's a system that keeps everyone in line, from the lowliest peasant to the most skilled craftsman. By midday, the village hums with activity. Children scurry about, playing games that mimic the adult world they're destined to join. Farmers returned from the fields, their hands stained with earth and sweat. The scent of baking bread wafts through the air, a rare pleasure in a world where luxury is often just surviving another day. As you pause for a quick meal, likely a piece of coarse bread and some cheese, you think about your place in this intricate tapestry of life. You're not a king, not a warrior, but your work is essential. Your creations are more than just objects. They're part of the economic and cultural fabric that holds the community together. It's a life of humble pride, where the satisfaction of a job well done outweighs the lack of wealth or status. So, as you prepare to dive back into your work, remember that while history books might forget the artisans, your fingerprints are all over the legacy of this age. You're part of a tradition that will continue to shape the world long after you've laid down your tools. And while the day is far from over, you've already contributed your share to the ongoing saga of Saxon England. As you set your tools back in motion, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of your daily grind. You're not just hammering away on a whim, there's a method to this medieval madness, and it's all about materials and skill. First off, let's talk iron. You didn't just pop down to your local medieval Home Depot for a fresh batch. No, this iron came from bloomeries, a delightful term for a furnace that looks like it's been cobbled together by someone with a grudge against OSHA. These rudimentary setups smelted iron ore, transforming it into wrought iron by heating and hammering it. Sans the modern conveniences of blast furnaces or safety goggles. Now, if you were lucky, you'd get your hands on some high-quality stuff from the Weald, a forested area in southeastern England known for its iron production. But let's not romanticize this. The process was labor-intensive, and the final product less consistent than your average medieval ale. You were often left with a material that was as unpredictable as the weather in Wessex. Still, you made do, because necessity is the mother of invention, or in your case, a stern taskmaster with a penchant for calloused hands. Wood was another staple of your trade, and you had plenty of options growing right in your backyard. Oak, ash, and yew were the stars of the show, each offering different properties for different purposes. Oak was your go-to for anything that needed to withstand the test of time, think furniture and large structural pieces. Ash was the athlete of woods, flexible and strong, perfect for tool handles and weaponry. And yew? Well, yew was the medieval equivalent of carbon fibre, used predominantly for longbows, which were the sniper rifles of their day. You sourced these from local woodlands, where trees were as common as complaints about the weather. Then there were textiles. You might not have been a weaver, but you certainly relied on them. Wool was the big player here, coming from the fluffy sheep dotting the landscape. It was sheared, spun, and woven into cloth, providing warmth in an age when central heating was a fire hazard waiting to happen. Linen, made from flax, was your summer saviour, offering a lighter alternative when the sun deigned to make an appearance. Both were dyed using natural materials like woad, which gave a blue hue, or madder for reds, because who doesn't love a bit of colour in their life, even if it's mostly to hide the dirt? But let's not kid ourselves. The end product was a far cry from the vibrant fabrics of today. These were earthy tones, practical and hard-wearing, much like their wearers. And while we're here, let's debunk a myth or two. Saxon artisans weren't just rough-and-ready craftsmen churning out basic goods. No, these folks were the real deal, blending artistry with practicality. They understood the properties of their materials with a depth that would put many modern-day hobbyists to shame. And while you're shaping a brooch or carving a piece of oak, you're not just crafting for the sake of artistry. There's a political backdrop to all this handiwork. King Ine, the ruler of Wessex, whose reign from 688 to 726 was as sturdy as one of your oak beams. Ine was a bit of a reformer, introducing laws that would have made Hammurabi nod in approval. His legal code, one of the earliest for Anglo-Saxons, touched on everything from property rights to personal injury. And guess what? These laws had a direct impact on your daily life. Take theft, for instance. Under Ine's laws, the penalty for stealing from a workshop like yours could be as severe as having a hand chopped off. Talk about a deterrent. So, you worked with one eye on your craft and the other on your surroundings, ever vigilant for the sticky-fingered few who might fancy making off with your hard-earned goods. Ine's reign also brought about a semblance of stability, allowing trade to flourish. This was crucial for you, as it meant more opportunities to barter your wares, or, if fortune smiled, sell them for those elusive silver pennies. And let's not forget the social aspect. As an artisan, you were part of a community, a guild of sorts, though not in the formal sense that would emerge in later centuries. You shared techniques, traded materials, and perhaps even collaborated on larger projects. This camaraderie was essential, particularly in an era where life was as unpredictable as a Saxon weather forecast. Your workshop wasn't just a place of production, it was a hub of innovation, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of limited resources. So, as you continue to craft, remember that you're not just producing goods, you're weaving yourself into the very fabric of Saxon society. Each item you create is a piece of history, a tangible link to a world where craftsmanship was as crucial as any king. And while the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting shadows that dance across your workbench, you realize that your role is both humble and heroic. You're a guardian of tradition, a creator of culture, and, above all, a testament to the enduring human spirit. As noon approaches, the village buzzes with the anticipation of another day's work, and you, with your hands stained by the very materials that define your craft, stand ready to meet the challenges of the afternoon. As noon approaches, your workshop door creaks open, and the village beyond is alive with its own rough symphony, hammers clanging, livestock bleating, and the indistinct chatter of your fellow villagers. But don't misinterpret this as the sound of a lunch break. The concept of break is about as real as a unicorn in 8th century Wessex. Instead, you're about to dive into the communal hubbub of village life, where the idea of work-life balance leans heavily to the work side. In this society, personal space is more myth than reality. The village green is the social epicenter, a medieval version of the water cooler. If water coolers came with the risk of stepping in something decidedly less refreshing. Here, the marketplace thrives, a chaotic bazaar of bartering and bargaining that's more theatre than commerce. Artisans like you are the backbone of this setup, your wares turning the wheels of trade faster than Athene runs to battle. But before we get too misty-eyed about community spirit, let's peel back the layers. See, the social structure is as intricate as one of your brooches. You, the artisan, sit above the Seol, your average free farmer, but below the Thing, the local muscle with a sword and a plot of land. The Seol might envy your skill, but they also enjoy a freedom you don't, a freedom to work their own land, to toil for their own gain rather than someone else's. But don't get too jealous. Their lives are no picnic, more a perpetual cycle of sowing, tending, and hoping the weather doesn't decide to ruin your year's work in a single stormy afternoon. And the Thens? Ah, the noble class, strutting about with an air of superiority thicker than a Saxon oak. These guys are the medieval equivalent of middle managers, serving the king while keeping an eye on their own interests. They're the ones who might commission your finest work, but make no mistake, their world is a political chess game, and everyone else is just a pawn. As you navigate this social labyrinth, the landscape itself plays an unsung role. With its rolling hills and dense forests, Wessex is a place where geography dictates daily life. Villages are often isolated, connected by paths that are more suggestion than road. The result? A community that's tightly knit because it has to be. The nearest market might be a couple of leagues away, a journey that's less about the destination and more about the survival skills you pick up along the way. You're not just an artisan, you're a part-time hiker, a reluctant explorer in this rugged terrain. Now, speaking of markets, let's talk commerce. The village marketplace is a microcosm of Saxon economics. Forget about fixed prices. Here, everything's negotiable. Your brooch might fetch a few eggs, some pig lard, or, if you're lucky, a rare silver penny. It's a place of vibrant exchange, a mosaic of needs and wants where everyone's looking for a deal. But let's not romanticize it too much. It's also a breeding ground for disputes, where a misplaced word can escalate faster than a Saxon feud. And about the notion of medieval work-life balance, here's the kicker. There isn't any. Your life is your work, and your work is your life. The idea of separate spheres is as foreign as a Byzantine coin. Your hands might craft beauty, but they're also your livelihood, your survival. Days bleed into nights with a rhythm dictated not by the ticking of a clock, but by the rise and set of the sun. The village might pause for a communal feast or religious observance, but even these moments are charged with the energy of a community always on the edge. The irony, of course, is that this lack of separation gives your work a kind of purity. You're not just clocking in, you're living your craft embedded within the very fabric of your community. While today we might chase the illusion of work-life separation, back then they understood that life itself was the real work. As the sun dips slightly, casting long shadows and signaling the afternoon stretch, you're reminded of the pressing realities of your craft. The silver penny is still a coveted rarity, and bartering remains the language of trade, but don't let this grind get you down. In the grand tapestry of Saxon life, your role is indispensable. You're not just creating objects, you're forging connections, shaping the cultural landscape as tangibly as the hills and valleys that surround you. So, as the village buzzes with the energy of another working afternoon, you stand at the heart of it all, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of Saxon artisans. There's no time for rest, no midday pause, just the steady hum of life and labour in medieval Wessex. And while the future may be uncertain, your place in this vibrant, chaotic tapestry is assured. As you glance out at the bustling marketplace, you know that your work, your life, is interwoven with the very essence of your community. The afternoon awaits, and with it, the endless possibilities of creation and connection. With the afternoon stretching before you like the endless plains of Mercia, it's time to delve into the nitty-gritty of Saxon trade, the lifeblood of your handcrafted world, and the economic engine that propels it beyond the borders of your village. Forget the myth of self-sufficient, isolated hamlets. Trade routes sprawled across the land like the tangled threads of a tapestry, connecting Wessex to the Frankish Empire and even the distant shores of the Mediterranean. Saxon England was less a series of disconnected dots and more a vibrant web of exchange and commerce. Let's start with the logistics because, in case you hadn't noticed, the medieval world didn't exactly have Amazon Prime. Getting goods from point A to point B was a Herculean task involving creaky carts, stubborn mules, and waterways that doubled as highways. The River Thames, for instance, was a bustling aquatic thoroughfare, teeming with boats carrying everything from wool to the latest fashions in Frankish weaponry. And those boats weren't just floating baskets, they were the cutting-edge technology of the time, using sail and oar to navigate the unpredictable English weather. Now, if you're picturing these traders as rugged adventurers, you're not far off. They were the Indiana Jones of their day, minus the fedora and bullwhip. These guys braved bandits, storms, and the occasional Viking raid, because why not throw some Norsemen into the mix? And they did it all for the chance to trade goods like your finely crafted brooches for items that couldn't be found locally. In fact, archaeological evidence shows that luxury goods like wine from the Rhineland and pottery from the Mediterranean were making their way into Saxon hands, proving that your village was far from isolated. And let's not forget the role of the church in this economic symphony. The monasteries weren't just spiritual sanctuaries. They were economic powerhouses, amassing wealth and land faster than a bishop can say, Amen. They acted as brokers and bankers, facilitating trade and even lending money at interest, a practice that would eventually evolve into the medieval banking system. The church, with its vast networks and influence, was the medieval equivalent of a multinational corporation, a paradoxical blend of piety and profit. So how did this all work in practice? Well, picture a bustling marketplace, not unlike your own village green, but on a grander scale. These trade hubs were popping up in burgeoning towns like London and Canterbury, places where traders haggled over prices with the intensity of a Saxon council debating land rights. A silver penny here, a bolt of cloth there. Every exchange was a delicate dance of supply and demand, driven by the relentless pursuit of profit and survival. Speaking of silver pennies, let's address the elephant in the room, currency. While bartering was as common as rain in England, coins were slowly becoming the preferred method of exchange. The introduction of the silver penny under King Offa of Mercia in the late 8th century was a game-changer for Saxon trade. Weighing in at a diminutive 1.5 grams, these coins were the Bitcoin of their day, enabling more complex and far-reaching economic interactions. But just because coins were circulating doesn't mean everyone was rolling in wealth. The harsh reality was that many of these shiny tokens ended up in the coffers of the elite, leaving the average artisan like yourself to rely on the tried and true method of bartering. It's like having a wallet full of monopoly money. It's nice to look at, but not much use if you can't spend it. The myth of the isolated village is easily debunked when you consider the cross-channel exchanges that were happening with surprising regularity. Ships laden with English wool, the medieval equivalent of gold set sail for the Frankish ports, where they swapped their cargo for wine, fine cloth, and spices. This wasn't just a trickle of trade, it was a torrent, an economic lifeline that tied the fortunes of Saxon England to the broader European stage. And let's not overlook the political backdrop that made all this possible. The reigns of kings like Offa and Charlemagne weren't just about conquest and consolidation, they were about stability, the kind that allowed trade to flourish. You see, trade routes were only as reliable as the political climate, and a king's ability to keep the peace was worth its weight in silver pennies. Offa, with his diplomatic ties to Charlemagne, was like a medieval trade ambassador, ensuring that the flow of goods between England and the continent was as smooth as a well-oiled chariot wheel. But let's not get lost in the romance of trade. The reality was often far less glamorous. The roads were perilous, the weather unpredictable, and the tolls. Oh, the tolls! Every petty lord with a patch of land along a trade route saw an opportunity to line his pockets, charging fees that would make a modern-day highway robbery look like a charity event. Yet, despite these challenges, the merchants persevered, driven by the promise of profit and the thrill of discovery. As the afternoon progresses, the village marketplace reflects this vibrant web of economic exchange. It's a microcosm of the wider world, a place where local produce sits alongside exotic imports, where Saxon ingenuity meets Frankish flair. It's a reminder that, despite the challenges, trade was the lifeblood of the Saxon economy, a testament to human resilience and resourcefulness. So, as you stand amidst the hustle and bustle, with the shadows growing longer and the air filled with the scent of opportunity, remember that you're not just an artisan in the sleepy village. You're a participant in a grand economic experiment, a pivotal player in the complex dance of medieval trade. The afternoon is far from over, and the stage is set for the next act in this unfolding saga of commerce and connection. As the afternoon sun hangs low, casting a golden hue over the bustling marketplace, you find yourself reflecting on the day's work and the broader world in which you're a cog. It's easy to romanticize your role as a Saxon artisan, picturing yourself as a lone craftsman hammering away in isolation. But the truth is, you're as intertwined with the lives and economies around you as the fibers in a woolen cloak. Your creations are more than mere objects. They're threads in a tapestry of trade that stretches across the known world. Let's talk about that legacy, shall we? The craftsmanship you've honed isn't just a relic of its time, it's a foundation stone for the future, influencing artisans for generations. Your brooches, with their swirling designs, don't just pin cloaks, they pin down cultural identity. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find your artistic descendants in the guilds of medieval Europe, the Renaissance workshops of Florence, and even the factories of the Industrial Revolution. The Saxon knack for blending utility with beauty laid the groundwork for what we now consider design. And what do the historical records say about you and your peers? Well, they're a bit sparse, pesky. Medieval chroniclers were more interested in wars and kings than in the daily grind of artisans. But when archaeologists dig up your work, it's like unearthing time capsules. The tools, the techniques, the wear and tear, each tells a story that the written word often skips. The Staffordshire hoard, discovered in 2009, is a treasure trove of Saxon gold and garnet, showcasing the intricate metalwork that artisans like you perfected. It's a reminder that while the chronicles may ignore you, the earth remembers. Now, let's pivot to the lessons your world offers to our modern economies, because there's plenty to learn from a society where trade networks were the lifeblood and adaptability was key. For one, you lived in a world where barter was king and flexibility was a survival skill. In today's market, where cryptocurrencies and digital assets seem to change value faster than a Saxon storm rolls in, that ability to adapt and trade creatively is more relevant than ever. And then there's the matter of resourcefulness, making something out of nothing or nearly nothing. In an age where sustainability is the buzzword, the Saxon craftsman's knack for utilizing every scrap of material is a lesson in efficiency. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Your world had its share of harsh realities, ones that modern societies would do well to avoid. Economic inequality was as real as the iron in your anvil, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a few while the rest bartered and scraped by. Today's global economies are still grappling with these imbalances, proving that some lessons take more than a millennium to learn. And as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with hues that would make even the finest Saxon dye envious. It's time to confront those myths we've been debunking throughout our journey. The romantic notion of the artisan as a solitary genius, toiling in a pastoral idyll, is as much a fairy tale as a dragon-slaying knight. Your reality was grittier, with calloused hands and a back sore from hours at the workbench. Yet there's an undeniable allure to that myth, isn't there? It speaks to our desire to see ourselves as masters of our own destiny, even when the truth is far more complex. So, as you lay down your tools for the day, take a moment to appreciate the legacy you're crafting. It's not just in the objects you create, but in the traditions you uphold and the innovations you inspire. Your work is a testament to the enduring human spirit, a reminder that in every era the artisan's touch shapes the world in ways both seen and unseen. And there you have it, a day in the life of a Saxon artisan woven into the rich tapestry of history. As you settle in for the night, perhaps with a bowl of porridge that cost you the equivalent of a few hens, remember that your legacy is not just in what you leave behind, but in the stories that continue to be told. In the end, it's the enduring human drive for creation and connection that links us all, across time and space, in an unbroken chain of craftsmanship and culture. Here's to you, the unsung hero of the medieval world, crafting a future one brooch at a time.